For me, it began in 1992 with an ending. I was 5 years old and happened upon a comic shop advertising the death of Superman in its window display. From that moment forward, the Man of Steel has been my favorite character, and now on this podcast, I'm exploring my fandom and examining the creative visions that have shaped the last son of Krypton across media for over 80 years. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. This is part 2 of our discussion about the 1950s television series Adventures of Superman, and I'm joined once again by Rich Roney.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Again, as I said last time, there's no one else I would even dream of having on these Adventures of Superman episodes. So we have a lot to get into. I have a real quick plug before we do that, which is I have a new podcast series that's out. And I know you might be thinking, isn't Digging for Kryptonite a new podcast series? And it is, relatively. But the new show is My Comic Shop Book Club. And, you know, longtime listeners of mine, and you, of course, know that I've done book club episodes here and there over the years. I've done a few on my Patreon page. I've done a few as special episodes of My Comic Shop History. But I've sort of always kind of had this itch to turn My Comic Shop Book Club into its own full-fledged series. And now I have. So it premiered 1 week ago on January 13th. Episodes will be released every other Wednesday. So between My Comic Shop Book Club and Digging for Kryptonite, I'll have a new episode out every week. Plus My Comic Shop History is out on a monthly basis. So there's a lot of content for everyone to hopefully enjoy. And the episode of My Comic Shop Book Club that premiered 1 week ago, in case anyone hasn't checked it out yet, is a discussion of All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, by Frank Miller and Jim Lee. And my guest for that one was Sean Hendricks of Fat Moose Comics. We had a lot of fun. There was some whiskey involved. There was a lot of laughter. And ultimately, I think a thoughtful and fair breakdown of a somewhat controversial title from DC's defunct All-Star line. So for anyone who wants to check out that or subsequent episodes, the video version is on my YouTube channel, Anthony Desiato. All my podcasts are now available in video form on my YouTube channel. If you want to listen to the audio version, it's available via all of the major podcast directories, Apple, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you would get your podcasts. So again, audio version is on the podcast platforms, and the video version is on my YouTube channel. We have a ton of bonus content on the Patreon page. So again, there's a lot of content. I hope that everyone checks it out and that everyone enjoys. And Rich, we will certainly be roping you in for future episodes of My Comic Shop Book Club. You and I have already talked about that a little bit, but we'll have you on for that for sure.
Perfect.
So we had a pretty epic conversation about Adventures of Superman 2 weeks ago. Then we did a bonus episode on my Patreon page where we broke down the standout episode, your favorite, one of my favorites, Panic in the Sky. So for anyone who wants to check that out, I hope they will. We had a great discussion and really got, pretty specific about it. You laid out the episode in magnificent detail. For anyone who hasn't, who's not a patron, or if you just haven't listened or watched yet, I think you and I had a little bit of miscommunication in terms of what I was asking you for. But it was this really funny moment where I was like, okay, let's talk about the episode. We can go scene by scene. And you were like, well, if it's okay, I'll give a brief high-level summary. And I'm like, okay, great. And then you went in the most specific detail. I mean, you basically acted out the episode. It was kind of astounding. I mean, honestly, I'm glad we captured that. I think it's one of those like a very rare moment, and I'm glad that we captured it on audio and video.
A week later, I'm still embarrassed.
Oh.
I'm definitely embarrassed. I know Steve contacted me and said, "Hey, Rich, it sounds like you just, went on for over 7 minutes." And in my mind, I thought it was probably 2 or 3 minutes. I didn't know. I mean, that clearly must have been my OCD. And the sad thing was, I didn't have any notes. I just did that off memory. So that's even more terrifying. But, sorry, I stepped on your toes and apologize.
No, I know, we talked about this off mic too, but honestly, I'm more than anything, I am kind of glad that it happened and that we have it captured, because I think it really, like all chop busting aside, I really think it speaks to, your fandom, your passion for this series and for that episode in particular. And it's like, yeah, I could probably do 7 minutes straight on my favorite Smallville episode for sure. So I think that's really what comes across. And I think that's, ultimately a wonderful thing. But yeah, it was a 7-minute monologue, and the episode itself of Adventures of Superman that we were talking about is only 24, 25 minutes. So that was really something, I gotta say. So for anyone who hasn't checked it out, not to harp on the Patreon, but it's really a fun episode, and I think you would enjoy it, especially if you've been enjoying these conversations about Adventures of Superman. So thank you for participating in that. So I'll be in case I ask you for any summaries, we'll tread carefully in this episode.
Understood. As I've said, you're in the driver's seat, and I'm going to be super attentive today. So last time, 2 weeks ago, in part 1, again, really, I enjoyed it immensely, and we talked about that, but we primarily focused on seasons 1 and 2 of Adventures of Superman. In this episode, I want to pick up on a few threads from last time. I want to talk about the color seasons 3 through 6. I have a lot of thoughts on those. I want to talk about the end of the show, the legacy of the show, attempts to continue the show. I know you want to circle back to the radio series and the Kirk Alyn serials, the precursors to Adventures of Superman. So there's a lot for us to cover today. I think we'll have more than enough to sustain us for, however long this goes. But before all of that, kind of tying into the idea of the legacy of Adventures of Superman, I have somewhat of a personal, but like a big picture question that I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to lay it out first, because I really think it gets at the heart of why we're even having this conversation in the first place. You and I have talked a lot over the years, and I've explored this a lot on my podcast, about the impact that our introductions to characters can have on us, right? Especially when those introductions come at a really early age. Right? They can be incredibly formative in shaping our taste as readers, our collecting behavior, and also just what we look for in terms of stories featuring those characters, right? Like, so those first introductions, the way we meet certain characters can really have a big effect. And, as you explained last time, this was Adventures of Superman. The George Reeves incarnation was your introduction to Superman. It turned you on to the comics. You got that first issue, that issue of World's Finest. That was your first comic. And I guess I'm curious, and if you don't necessarily have a specific answer for this, that's fine, but I was curious if you can pinpoint any ways in which, again, this version of Superman kind of impacted your view of the character, and maybe things that you like or don't like in subsequent versions based on this introduction to the character that you had. Does that make sense? Yeah. This definitely influenced my perception and kind of the ideal of what you consider a hero. I think I've touched on this before, but to reiterate, I'm so impressed with George Reeves' portrayal, especially of Clark, more so Clark than Superman. And you know more than I do about this, but I will say I was super, no pun intended, I was tremendously impressed with his portrayal, especially of Clark, because he was not a timid milquetoast or, a reticent, kind of goofy, timid mouse. He was very assertive, very purposeful, very decisive. So it was difficult for me when I saw other versions, because this was kind of the ideal. This was the template in my mind. I candidly defer to you. You have a greater breadth of it. I mean,
no, but actually, you hit on something that maybe we can kind of flesh out just for a second here, which is, because as you were talking, and we've talked about this so much about how both of us really enjoyed this version of Clark Kent, right? And so, I am curious, like when the Christopher Reeve version came out, obviously that's a very different take on Clark Kent. So, I mean, I know, and, we've spoken about the Donner movies over the years, and I know generally you're a fan, but I mean, was that something that was kind of tough to get behind, like that version of Clark where it's it's a wonderful performance overall, I think, but it is very, very removed, again, from what we saw George Reeves do. And, Clark he's bumbling and cartoonish. I mean, is that something that was tough to kind of reconcile?
Yeah. Now, but I will say the comic books that I read as a child, right? Again, I watched this in the 1960s. It was all reruns on a local station outside Chicago. And I was at the mercy of whatever the program manager decided or chose to put on for that given summer afternoon. But the comics that I read at that same point in time, from like, say, 1963 to, the late 60s, early 70s, when I read DC, the portrayal of Clark was more akin to the Christopher Reeve portrayal, where he's definitely an antithesis. He's also, if I may, with The Adventures of Superman, Clark is the real deal. With the Donner versions, it's almost Clark is the mask, and the Donner versions and Christopher Reeves, his portrayal of Superman is powerful. I mean, I love his portrayal of Superman, the character, but it was hard. It was hard for me to sync up or reconcile or come to terms with his portrayal of Clark. It was a little too cartoonish, a little too over the top.
I'm with you. The thing I've always loved about, and I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's okay. One of the things I've always loved about the Christopher Reeve performance is that scene from the first movie where, Lois is getting ready and Clark is waiting in her apartment, and, he toys with telling her his secret, right? And he takes off the glasses and he stands up straight and his voice drops. And it's like the physical transformation that you see him go through is really it's just a masterclass in acting. And it's like, wow, you could kind of see how maybe people wouldn't put it together that they're the same guy. And I like it in that sense. But yeah, I've never been a fan of that bumbling Clark. And this might be the Smallville fan in me. In fact, it's almost certainly the Smallville fan in me. But, Clark is who he is. So the idea that he would put on this show, I don't know. I feel like it diminishes who he is to an extent. I mean, that's sort of the way I view the character. So I get what you're saying. And I could see, especially growing up watching George Reeves, I could see how there might be a little bit of a disconnect when the Donner movie came out. The one other thing that I was curious about is, and again, not to take us, too far astray here, but, we've talked about how decisive and clear of purpose both Clark and Superman are in this series. Even the origin episode, I mean, there's really not much waffling as far as am I going to become Superman or not? It's like, boom, this guy's out there. He's Superman. There's really no inner conflict for him, which of course is a big difference, between what we're seeing now on the big screen, right? With the Zack Snyder, Henry Cavill take on the character. And, so I'm curious there too, where, you see a Superman who's really more conflicted about what his role in the world is going to be. Again, very different from the George Reeves Superman. Is that something that kind of takes you a minute to get used to, or do you kind of chalk it up to, well, it's, a sign of the times and we've had decades in between? Where do you kind of fall on that?
Boy, well, let me say this before I answer that. One thing that I really enjoyed, and I know I'm mixing mediums, but I loved it in just after Crisis on Infinite Earths, when John Byrne kind of, relaunched and did a fresh take on Superman in the mid 1980s, because John Byrne's version of Superman was Superman, but his version of Clark was more akin to the George Reeves version. His Clark was more assertive. He wasn't, and even, I'll tell you, even as a child, say being 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, when I would read the Silver Age books, it always annoyed me how hurtful and disdainful, like Lois and Lana, and dismissive they were of Clark. And that harkens back, I think, to the Siegel-Schuster version in the very early years. Clark was a timid mouse, and he was looked down upon by Lois and Lana. So I did like the George Reeves and the John Byrne version. I will say, I got to be as honest as possible. The Brandon Routh version, the recent Zack Snyder version, in a rough fashion. I watch the movie, but they're not my Superman. I mean, I can appreciate the intellectual firepower and the thoughtfulness Zack Snyder's imposing on Superman and the messiah versions. And, is he a deity? Is he worshipped? But he kind of seems so self-reflective and introspective and hesitant. It's really at odds with and Anthony, again, I've said this, your energy and your interest has really increased my own interest and especially my appreciation of what this TV series did. Look, I was only going to watch 3 or 4 episodes, and I figured I could milk that and talk to you. I really dug in and watched a lot of these episodes, and I gained much greater appreciation of this character.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally get what you're saying. And yeah, I just bring this up because I think it's really interesting, again, how we view the character and how those introductions shape that view. As I've discussed many times, right? Death of Superman was my starting point, but really the 10 years I spent watching the television series Smallville, I think it's fair to say that was my most formative experience as a Superman fan and in shaping how I look at the character. And, in that show, Clark is always, depicted. He's a good person with a strong moral code instilled in him by his parents, and he's helping people on a weekly basis. Yet he is very much at odds with his alien origins and the destiny that awaits him. And, the idea of becoming a public-facing superhero is something that it takes him the entirety of the series to get to, 200 episodes. So, for me, like watching the Zack Snyder movies, and I've already done hours on this podcast about the Snyder movies, but, for me, that felt very much in line with the Clark that I saw on Smallville. I mean, it was kind of taken to the next level, I think, to a certain extent. But, this whole idea of, that introspection and wrestling with, well, what is my role in the world going to be? What should it be? Again, that felt very much in line. So again, like I had this formative experience, and then I saw a version that to me kind of felt in line with that. So for me, I think it was much easier for me to kind of make that leap. But again, I could see growing up with the George Reeves Superman, how again, it might take a minute to kind of get used to that, and how you might feel like, well, that's not really my Superman. I have to say, and there will be things that we talk about on, subsequent episodes of this podcast, or maybe things that we don't cover for a reason. Not every version of Superman is my favorite, but, I'm happy to say, like, I can say that I'm a fan of, the Zack Snyder Superman, and I'm a fan of the George Reeves Superman. I think, it's such a rich character, and you can take kind of different approaches. And I do genuinely think that each approach was probably appropriate for the time. And that's the other factor here. We're talking about a character with an 80-year history. So,
yeah.
I think maybe each generation kind of gets the Superman, it needs to an extent.
No, and 2 things I'll say. I don't want you to think that, or I don't want the listeners to think that, hey, it's George Reeves, and on a scale of 1 to 10, he's 10, and everyone else is a 3 or a 4. That's not the case. I mean, again, what Christopher Reeve did, and like you said, that one scene, his body language, he just, kind of tilts his shoulders a little bit. He stands a little straighter. And in microseconds, you see a powerful transformation. But to me, in the Donner movies, it's about Superman. And Clark is just kind of a caricature, right? But he really plays into the extremes of what Siegel and Schuster, set up as well, I'll be so timid, no one will ever connect the dots.
Right. Well, thank you for indulging me on that bit there. I thought it was interesting to explore, again, kind of tying into this idea of the legacy of the character and how, it shaped your view of Superman moving forward. So, last time we talked about the first 2 seasons of Adventures of Superman, the black and white years. And as we laid out, those were really, especially in the first season, really noirish crime dramas. In the second season, I think it still retained that spirit, but was definitely, a little bit lighter. We saw a bit more Superman. Superman used his powers more. We had a change in actress with Lois Lane. There were more heartfelt and human interest stories. So there was definitely a shift in the second season, but I think, we can draw maybe a dotted line between seasons 1 and 2, but a hard, bold line between the first 2 seasons and seasons 3 through 6. But before we get to the color years, I thought it might be fun because we covered a lot, but I wanted to do like just a quick kind of like lightning round about a few episodes that we didn't necessarily talk about, not to take apart the entire episode, but just to kind of call out, things that.
Good warning there.
No. That's for myself. That's for myself as well. And
no, you're being too diplomatic.
But just to kind of call out some things that either you and I talked about off mic, or maybe things that we didn't get to talk about that I think we would find funny now, and hopefully our audience would as well. So I'll go through them, and if there's obviously anything about the episode or another episode that I don't mention, please, let's take this opportunity, because I think it'll be fun. There's the episode. So these first few are from season 1, The Mind Machine, which is interesting because, with the exception of the Unknown People, aka Superman and the Mole Men, right? With the exception of that and the origin episode of Superman, again, as we talked about, season 1 in particular, very, very grounded. So this mind control machine was one of the more kind of fantastical plot points in the episodes, and I thought that was interesting. This episode is infamous for Superman ducking when a gun is thrown at him during the final battle. Do you remember this?
Only in reading it. I don't remember it per se, but I did read on one of the blogs or IMDb that it was a stuntman.
Yes.
Who actually ducked. When the gangster threw the revolver at him.
Yeah, and that's why I say Superman, not George Reeves, because it's funny because the first time I watched it, I guess I wasn't paying close enough attention, and I was like, wow, I can't believe he would duck. And then I too did some reading about it, and I went back and I watched the scene, and with a closer eye, yes, it's very blatantly a stuntman. And we saw episode to episode, right? The bad guys would always shoot at Superman, and he would just stand there, of course, because the bullets don't affect him. And I noticed in the earlier seasons, you don't even see anything coming at him. In the later seasons, I guess the effects improved a little bit, where you saw the effect of a bullet bouncing off of him.
Yeah.
But in any event, so this episode, one of the bad guys throws the gun. I don't know why they thought that would work when bullets didn't, but nevertheless, they throw it, and the stuntman ducks. And so that's kind of an infamous moment as far as the fight sequences go.
True.
This one, I know we'll have fun with this one. The Secret of Superman, where the bad guys use hypnosis on the people close to Superman.
Oh God, yeah.
I want you to lay out the Perry thing, but let me just say quickly, what I love, the episode opens, if memory serves, with Jimmy's mother calling Clark in the middle of the night because Jimmy hasn't come home yet. And unbeknownst to them and to us, he's been hypnotized, right? We'll find that out shortly. But again, going back to the impatient Clark, Clark wakes up, he wants nothing to do with this. He's like, listen, he'll probably be home soon. Ultimately, though, he does get involved, but that initial dismissiveness this makes me laugh.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with George Reeves, and that's not the only episode. Much as I love his chemistry with children and his generosity, there's other episodes, but boy, he's impatient. I mean, that Jimmy's mother, and then also that one secretary early on when she didn't give the note to him at the right time. I mean, his impatience is right up there. The other thing that I'm going to leap forward, this whole thing with hypnosis, is this the one where, it is, where they do some contrivance where Clark is fired from the Daily Planet, and in 2 days he's a Skid Row bum. Yeah. I mean, I do remember only within the past couple of weeks watching it and then discussing it with you, but he goes out to a friend of his who has a coffee truck outside, and long story short, he goes, hey, Charlie, can you cover me for a couple of days, and whoa, Kent, slow down, you're already into me for 50 cents.
Yeah, I guess Clark wasn't too good with his money. It lasted him barely 24 hours. Yeah, that was funny. What I thought you were going to say, and this was the thing that I had written down, is
Perry.
Is Perry, right? So there's this press club right at the Daily Planet with the dining hall, and it's okay, that makes sense. But apparently, Perry also seems to have what's essentially a hotel suite within the Daily Planet, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Yeah. But then the thing that always stood out, and this is a very small thing, but you and I have never been able to figure this out. He orders up coffee at I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be any breaking news or anything.
Yeah. My impression was, or I synthesized it, that he must have been working really late, chose not to go, or maybe he had a permanent apartment at the journalist club or whatever it was. But what baffled me is that I had the impression it's like 1:30 in the morning, and he's ordering a sandwich and coffee. And then he berates the fake waiter, like, hey, that coffee better not be cold. And I'm thinking, who's going to chug a couple of cups of coffee at 1:30 in the morning? It just seems so, weird. Like, why wouldn't you want to get to sleep? And he was like, he took his suit jacket off. He had like a robe on over his shirt and slacks. And he just that coffee better not be cold. It just flabbergasted me.
Yeah. I mean, it's like ultimately, right, that happened because they needed the bad guy to, impersonate the waiter. Like they needed Perry to order something, right, so that the plot could move forward. But yeah, it was just always kind of odd to me. We talked about this in the Patreon episode, but I'll just mention quickly, the Perry White in this series is exceptionally gruff. And Perry White generally, I think, is depicted that way. And so that didn't feel so out of line, but normally there's a little bit more of a warm center, a warmth to the character that you don't really see much of in this series, especially in the first couple seasons, but generally too.
Yeah, I agree. He is just gruff and almost cranky and curmudgeon-y, and just, he bites everybody's head off.
Yeah. There's I know last time we talked about the Crime Wave episode, the episode that largely consisted of recycled footage and newsreel footage and voiceover. But in that episode, do you remember they specified that Perry White used to be mayor of Metropolis?
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah. And I don't know of I don't know of any other instance in the comics or anything else where that was ever utilized, but I thought that was interesting. And again, it's one line, and that's, as far as I know, is like never followed up on, but they do in the voiceover, they mention like Perry White, editor of the Daily Planet, former mayor of Metropolis.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah.
I did not. I do know that earlier we discussed this, that one No Holds Barred, the wrestling episode. I mean, like Perry takes it upon himself to shut down that corrupt wrestling syndicate. And he's leading the charge on that thing. It seems like it was of interest to him, and he was going to make it of interest to the citizenry. But there was also another quirky thing in there where there's some college wrestler, and he's kind of flirting with Lois. And at one point, Perry goes, hey, lighten up, Clark. You're not doing this because of that young Kendall boy or something like that. And that baffled. Where did that come from?
I know. Well, it's funny. I guess maybe that is one instance of him, showing some interest and care for the people around him. That stood out to me too. That was especially interesting because, despite the fact that they did 104 episodes, right, that largely featured Lois and Clark and Superman, the notion of a romance between the two of them was touched. It was exceedingly rare in the show for that to even be acknowledged. So, that was such a small moment, but it 100% stood out to me too, where it's like, he's actually saying to Clark, like, do you have feelings for Lois? It was like, whoa.
Yeah. And it was a very abrupt, very abrupt, came out of nowhere. And to your point, I'm going on a tiny tangent. I liked the chemistry better with Lois from season 1, Phyllis Coates. I thought there was more chemistry. To me, she was more the quintessential Lois of the 1950s. But yeah, they're really only in the comics was that love, that triangle between Lois and Superman and Clark.
Right.
Here it was really very, very undertouched, very underdeveloped.
Yeah, for sure. And I have a little bit more on that, which when we get to the color episodes, and one in particular, the wedding of Superman. There was an episode that I don't know that we ever actually ended up talking about, but I emailed you and I was like, hey, if you can pop this disc in and watch it, it's very entertaining. The Human Bomb from season 1.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did watch that.
Yeah, what did you think of that one?
Well, I think that's the one where I figured Jimmy has got to be he has got to be a writer's dream. Yeah, when you look back on some of these episodes, and to your listeners, I say this with affection and respect, but boy, they did not put a lot of production value or money into the effects. But the issue here is there's some, I guess, weird gambler guy who gets like a vest and a fishing vest and loads it up with sticks of dynamite, and he's gonna constrain Superman for half an hour while some of his men do some robbery, and he takes Lois out on the balcony. But yeah, Jimmy, Jimmy's not the guy you want to help defuse a bomb. Let's just say that, and nor do you want Perry to try to work a tape recorder.
No, yeah, well said. I mean, it was an interesting episode because I feel like, in the color episodes, and we could talk about this, I noticed there were more instances of the bad guys like trying to trick Superman. And so this goes all the way back to season 1, but I thought this one was kind of interesting where, again, like they're actually going after Superman and trying to get him to do or not do something. And yeah, right, like you said, the bet is that this gambler can keep Superman at bay for 30 minutes. He can control Superman for 30 minutes. And what that means is he's going to tell Superman, you have to let this robbery unfold or else I'm going to blow up Lois on the ledge of the Daily Planet. I think the three things that stood out to me, and they're two of them are pretty small, but they still made me laugh, was Superman's out on the ledge with them, and we don't know this yet, but he has the idea that he's going to go into the office, right inside the ledge there, and he's going to have a policeman sit in his place, and through the use of shadows and recordings, he's going to make it seem like he's in the room where he's actually out stopping the robbery that he's not supposed to stop, right? But he has to excuse himself from the ledge, right, so that he can go into the office. And so the gambler is like, well, where are you going? And he's like, well, it makes me very nervous to see, and as Superman, he's like, it makes me very nervous to see Miss Lane out here like this. I have to go inside. And I don't know, it just made me laugh that was like the excuse he gave. And the guy was like, okay.
Yeah. Well, the two other things I'll say spontaneously. I found it interesting that Inspector Henderson was not in that episode, right? They had a different police official that I never saw since. Right. So I do wonder about that.
Well, you know why? Because they needed someone who looked more like George Reeves, who could sit in the chair. Like that's what's funny about this, right? Because it's like, yeah, normally you would have Inspector Henderson, but all of a sudden it's like this random person, and it's like, well, I wonder where Henderson is, and then it's like, oh, well, that's because he needs this guy to sit in the chair and pose as Superman.
Okay. See, I thought they would have, even with the shadow, where they got the light to. I thought they could have made it work. But you're right. Whoever this police lieutenant was, in terms of his physical appearance, he looked more like Superman. I absolutely agree. But the other thing that cracked me up, if I may, and only when I thought about it, maybe when I was a teenager or other times, candidly, Superman's powers in season 1 are really super strength, invulnerability to bullets, and flight, and the ability to really throw a punch, right? But I always wondered, why didn't he use his heat vision and just kind of get the guy to back off, give him a quick burn on his hand or burn, just to get him distant from Lois. None of that. There were no other powers other than the three I mentioned.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you. I noticed that too. And that was, again, one of the shifts that I noticed in the second season, where all of a sudden now you are seeing he's using X-ray vision on a more regular basis. We see super breath a few times. We see heat vision. So like, again, I think they started introducing more of those elements from the comics. But yeah, in the first season, it's like very bare bones with the powers.
Yeah, he's very physical. I mean, and Reeves was an ex-boxer. And I think I commented on this. I was just so impressed with his athleticism and his ability to really, really portray a real strong person who can throw a punch and fight bad guys in a couple of episodes. But I'm going to ask you, I'm going to throw something out and ask you to bring it up later. One thing that I found interesting and puzzling was in seasons 3 to 6, they seemed to introduce new superpowers a couple of times that were never seen subsequently. So I'll let you bring that up when we get more into the latter seasons. But they seem to create when needed, certain powers to close out an episode. New powers that were never seen subsequently.
Yeah, I have a perfect place where we can fold that into our discussion for sure. But the human bomb, like, overall was a fun episode. It was kind of thrilling. And the other real small thing that made me laugh is the gambler, while he's out on the ledge with Lois like handcuffed to him and a bomb strapped to his vest, he offers her a cigarette, and she says, "No, thank you. No, thank you." I mean, if ever there were a point where manners can kind of go out the window, I think it's there. But it's very polite as ever. He said, "No, thank you." But then to your point, Jimmy, so earlier in the episode, the gambler hands over a stick of dynamite from his vest to prove that he's serious. And Superman actually like flies it up and tests and sees that, oh, this is actually dynamite. Then genius Jimmy, right? He gets the idea to look up the name of the company that's on the stick of dynamite, and he doesn't find it in the phone book. So he leaps to the conclusion that the rest of, even though the one stick that Superman tested was real, that the rest of the dynamite is fake. And then like he goes out on the ledge and tries to fight this guy.
Yeah.
He went rogue. It was it's like, even if the dynamite were fake, he's still out on the ledge.
Anthony, I think there's 95 plus episodes. I don't know if Jimmy was in every single episode.
Yeah.
But Jimmy is a magnet for trouble. And he's got a couple of identical twins around the world that really were great plot devices. But, I don't know if you'd want Jimmy on your side when you're trying to defuse a bomb.
No, definitely not. Oh, but then, it's funny, not funny, but he falls and Superman catches him. And, the effects are very primitive, but you didn't see a ton of that. They did it in the Mole Men episode as well, where Superman catches one.
Yep.
And again, so it's very rudimentary, but it was interesting. Like we were just saying, you don't see him do a ton of different things with his powers in the early episodes. So that actually stood out to me as well.
To your point, the Mind Machine, there's one point when Superman is saving a plane from crashing. And that was the only time I saw that special effect filming, where he's kind of underneath the plane and, his hair's blowing in the wind and he's righting the plane to help it land. Whereas the vast majority, we've discussed this, that the way they would splice in stuff from prior episodes to save money from a production standpoint, how many times did Clark leave Perry's office and somehow between Perry's front door and the storage closet get his hat before he ran in there and changed his clothes? Talk about splicing in previous segments of film.
I know. They should have just had like a hat hook right outside of Clark's office, and then you would be like, well, okay, he leaves his office, he puts his hat on, and there we go.
Or film it, either way,
I know.
But that's a big misgiving, and I know we're going to get into it. It is really sad that, candidly, I think they were so economic and so frugal and so cheap that some of these were really like a theater play where you only got 10 or 11 characters. And we saw it a lot of times. The villains and the henchmen and the thugs would be recycled episode to episode to episode, except the one in the stolen costume. It was the only time I saw those two characters.
Yeah. But the analogy to a theater play is spot on. I thought that a number of times as well, for all the reasons that you just explained. And it is like you could see a lot of these episodes being mounted as a stage production, right? And then like maybe on a screen you would have the footage of him flying or something, or shadows. A lot of it really played out that way. It was interesting. And again, I know I said this last time, but to me, that's part of the charm of the series. Like, I like the idea that these were different types of stories than you would typically see. Like, I wasn't put off by the lack of the spectacle. I liked that they told different types of stories and stories that far more often called on, Clark and Lois and their investigative prowess more than they did Superman's powers. Because in most episodes, especially in the early ones, Superman is just needed for that save at the end.
Yes.
In a lot of them. So I thought that was interesting.
And I wonder how much of that was, to a degree, the economics and kind of their frugality and not putting money in. So we'll just save Superman to the end. And did that also open the door did it support George Reeves' view, where he kind of made it clear, like, look, I'm not going to play this cowardly cowardly character. So did it give more screen time to his portrayal of Clark, and where Superman just comes in at the end and saves the day?
Yeah, no, I know that's a good question. I mean, I wonder that, and maybe we'll circle back to that when we talk about, you know, the passing of George Reeves as depicted in the Hollywoodland movie. Any other season 1 episodes as part of this lightning round that you wanted to call out? Because I have a few from season 2, and then we'll move into the color episodes.
Okay, I guess the only things real fast, I did like the was it the Night Wolf or the Timber Wolf thing? That was an enjoyable episode to me. And then the last thing, the one you alluded to, and I'll have to watch it again. I never knew that Perry was the former mayor of Metropolis, but that final episode of season 1, where, boy, Superman cleans up Metropolis. I mean, he's got a chalkboard and he moves from the bottom up, you know, and he kicks off the gangs. But I was impressed in the final episode, where he cleans up Metropolis and he fights all the gangs. You wonder who Mr. Big or number 1 is. But I was impressed with how they wove in and spliced in all the prior episodes of fight scenes or him taking out gangsters. I thought, you know what, that was pretty good. It did give weight to this, or kind of like an accordion, opened it up and said, wow, there are a lot of gangsters, and he does show his prowess in stopping them. Yeah, for sure. And, you know, the whole bit about Perry being a mayor, again, you know, there's very, very fleeting moment, but I'm glad you brought that up again, because, you know, one other thing that really stood out to me across these episodes was, and I think this probably is a sign of the times, like the power of the press. You know, you see the Daily Planet occupies a very high position in the city of Metropolis. And, you know, whenever Lois and Clark or Jimmy identify themselves as reporters, like, you know, they instantly get, in most cases, right, the respect and attention of whoever they're talking to. And yeah. To your point, I was more impressed with that in season 2. Yeah. The credibility the Planet had, because I think there were a couple of early ons. There was like a former gangster who was trying to redeem himself, and you know, pressure was put on him to come back into the gang, and you know, he'd gotten out of jail, he's on the right road, and then there were a few other things where either the Planet was sponsoring something, or the Planet was endorsing something, or they had some program that was, you know, for the greater civic good. So yeah, there was a lot of credibility on the part of the Planet, and I think it was kind of reflective of the Cold War era, the post-World War II era, where there was more of a cohesiveness between the press and government. That's a perfect segue. You know, you mentioned the sponsorships, the contests, all that stuff that the Daily Planet was involved with. Because there's the episode, there's the clown who cried. Is that the? I've never seen that. I've never seen that. Oh, it's a good one. Yeah, and Anthony, that's something that I touched on weeks ago. That you don't have the season 2 DVDs. I don't have the season 2 DVDs, and I was also at the mercy of the production manager for WGN circa 1965, right? Or 64, 63, 66. There were certain episodes I've never seen till I watched them on DVD. And I think even in season 1, there were darker episodes. What was it? The Evil 3 or something like that, or the one thing where Lois is on a vacation and she's in some motel, and the motel owner was murdered. And she and another woman Lois was slugged in the face and knocked out. So it was a much grittier in season 1, more of a crime drama. But yeah, there were certain episodes I've never seen till I watched them just 2 or 3 months ago. I've never seen Superman on Earth. So I was at the mercy of the program manager. Oh, I see. Yeah, the Clown Who Cried was actually was an interesting one. That, yeah, the Daily Planet puts on this benefit to raise. It's like an astounding amount by 1950s terms, like $500,000 to send kids to camp, which that's awfully significant. No, I mean that's a lot even for today to send kids to camp. Yes. I mean. Yes. It's like a crazy amount of money for them to raise.
and I don't think I'm mistaken. I'm pretty sure that was the number. But there's a clown at the circus a Rolo, who they approach to participate, like to do an act during the benefit. And there's another clown from his past who knocks him out and takes his place because he wants to steal whatever cash is on hand at the benefit. So that's sort of what sets things in motion. But one thing that was funny about that episode is, we talked about how Lois was like always putting Clark down. Right? Because whenever, something was afoot, he was like, oh, I got to go. Right? And she was like, oh, he's probably hiding. In this episode, when they find out that the clown at the benefit is the imposter and he's made off with the money, Clark is like, I'm going to go after him. And Lois is like, no, Clark, don't. It's like, make up your mind. Make up your mind. All right. So while we're into season 2, just a quick lightning round, because we've been going for almost an hour. We haven't gotten to the color episodes yet. That's my fault. But I'm having so much fun talking about all this stuff. So, do you remember the Shot in the Dark episode where a little kid takes a photo of Clark changing into Superman? Did you see that one?
It's not. I've read about it where, his identity as Superman is at risk. But I think also the kid took a picture. It also incriminated a gangster or something like that.
Yeah, and the
kid was at risk.
And the whole gangster bit, that ends up being the larger thrust of the episode. But, just going back to like the angry, impatient Clark, when the woman comes to the office and she goes to Clark's office and she calls him Superman and she repeatedly insists that he's Superman, he gets increasingly agitated. He's like, I'm not,
really?
Like, what are you talking about? But again, like that side of him comes out, and it's so funny. We mentioned the limited effects and things like that. And in the Superman in Exile episode, when he becomes radioactive and he has to exile himself, the radioactive effect that they came up with, again, for the time, I thought was fine.
That's probably one of my top 10 episodes. I mean, maybe 10 or 11 but I was impressed where he kind of stops a nuclear reactor from exploding and he becomes contaminated with radiation. And he kind of sequesters himself up on this cabin, or maybe it was the same cabin from the stolen costume. I don't know.
Maybe. Actually, that would make sense, because I was wondering that. I don't think they accounted for whose cabin he was staying at. And not that it's a huge deal, but I'm like, how did he just like automatically had a place to go? But maybe that was the place where he brought the criminals in the stolen costume. I like that. I'm going to go with that.
Okay. But it was, for its time, and again, this was circa, 1953, 54, if that, 53 maybe. But they showed that, he would go near some flowers or plants and the radiation would kill them. So I was intrigued. I thought that you hit on this, and I thank you for it. To me, there's 3 big buckets. There's clearly season 1, which is more noir and a crime drama. There was season 2, which was a season in transition. And then to me, 3 through 6 are basically somewhat interchangeable or tremendously similar. But in season 2, the humanity, there were a number of episodes that really portrayed the human interest. And I thought this was really one that, wow, he did a good job showing how hurt he would be if he were sequestered from humanity.
Yeah, I'm with you. I will say, and I know I said this, I think, really quickly at the end of part 1, but, Superman in Exile and the defeat of Superman, where KRYPTONITE is introduced in the show. There were aspects of it that I liked, and I liked that, again, it challenged Superman in different ways than we had seen. I was hoping for a little bit more depth or emotion in terms of what Superman was feeling and dealing with. I felt like they could have gone a little bit deeper, but it is what it is. And overall, they were definitely interesting episodes. Again, I thought they could have kind of taken it, like in Panic in the Sky, what we talked about in our other episode, that beautiful, beautiful moment of the anguish and the turmoil as Clark just trying to figure out who he is and overcome this amnesia. And it's just a scene, but it's such a powerful scene. I guess I was hoping for something a little bit more akin to that in the defeat of Superman or Superman in Exile. And maybe it's unfair to kind of put that on the show, but
and also, if I could say this, I like what you just said. And this ties into other stuff, right? I mean, like, they were pumping these things out, doing at least 2 episodes a week, just banging them out. Because I think those guys came back. And I do want to touch on this later, but those producers were definitely not actor friendly, right? They captivated these guys for like 7 weeks, and we're going to bang out 14 episodes, right? Or 13 episodes. Real tight budget, really efficient, real cheap. Like you could see the rip in Superman's costume. I would love to know what their contract was like, right? How onerous was it, or how anti-actor or un-actor friendly? Sorry, I went on a tangent there. Sorry, I let you down.
No, not at all. I just have a few more things on my list from season 2. Oh, do you remember My Friend Superman with the diner owner?
Oh, yes. Where isn't there like a gun on the wall, and he traps, he bends it around gangsters and holds them together. I do remember that. Once again, Jimmy opens his mouth a lot.
Yeah, for sure. But so that's an episode where you have this Italian diner owner who boasts of a friendship with Superman, and it's very clear to us and the other characters that he's telling tall tales, he's exaggerating. There's a nice moment at the end where Superman is very gracious to him and kind of allows him to bask in this notion that they're friends, right? But at the end of the episode, Superman, they're in the diner and Superman beats the bad guys, and Superman has the situation well in hand. Right? Like clearly these guys are done. The diner owner and his daughter who works at the diner, they start throwing pies and other food at the bad guys. And then I think like Jimmy joins in as well. And it just struck me as so odd. It's like, this is your establishment. Why are you trashing it?
Oh, the other thing, my memory, and this is from memory because I haven't watched it, but that diner only has Jimmy and Lois and Clark and gangsters, and there's only about 7 or 8 people in it at the height of its densely populated, so I always wondered, how did that guy stay in business?
Well, that's a good question. The other thing too is, and not to get on a soapbox or anything, I'm Italian. The character depicted here is Italian. Very stereotypical. I mean, a very thick accent. He wants to offer them a sandwich. It was a lot of that, which was fine, and I was not offended by it. But it wasn't a very nuanced portrait of an Italian American. But that's just scratching the surface. There were numerous episodes, where the characters travel to Haiti and to South America. The show's treatment of indigenous peoples, again, was probably representative of the times. But again, I definitely through a modern lens, leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, in the episode where they go to Haiti, the bad guy turns out to be a white man in blackface.
Yes, yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that, again, you certainly wouldn't see that play today. I will say, I'll give the show this. I think it's season 1. I forget now. But the Riddle of the Chinese Jade.
Oh yes, that was season 1. One of the last 4 or 5 episodes, I think. Right,
with the Chinese, like antiques dealer. And, as you know, right, my wife is Chinese. Our son is half Chinese. When I saw the title and description of this episode, based on what I had seen in previous episodes with other cultures, I was a little worried. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh my God, I can only imagine what their depiction of Chinese people is going to be. And there wasn't an accent to be found or anything like that. I was pleasantly surprised by their treatment of the characters in that episode. I'll say that.
No, and to your point, that just for 10 seconds, that does harken to the crime drama thing, because some of those were the mystery of this, or the mystery of the broken statues, or the mystery of the deserted town. So I wonder how much of that was a throwback to radio serials from 10 years earlier. Well, say The Shadow or Dick Tracy or things like that.
Yeah. One of the final ones that I just wanted to call out is, real quick. We talked about The Face and the Voice last time, one of our all-time favorites, where a criminal undergoes plastic surgery and voice lessons to impersonate Superman. It's one of the best. But at the end of the episode, where they're finally both in the same scene together, they couldn't have found a body double who looked a little bit more like George Reeves. I know
it was. Now, see, I was impressed. Like we've said, this is like a village theater where you've only got 9 or 10 people on the stage. I was impressed with how they cut it, so you never saw the stunt man or the other actors face. You saw him running away in costume, and you saw the back of his head. And, George Reeves always obscured him as they had their fight at the end.
Yeah.
Boulder, I think, was the character's name.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is like, even from behind, it's like, this guy doesn't look like, he doesn't have, the stature. Anyway. But so the last thing on my list is the Whistling Bird episode. Do you remember that one where that nutty professor, Uncle Oscar, he comes back in season 3 and he plays a different professor who creates a time machine?
I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
That's fine. But in this episode, he comes up, his big experiment is like glue, for like stamp glue that's flavored. That's his big invention. But it turns out that it's highly combustible and it could be weaponized. And so bad guys try to steal the formula. That's the basic setup for it.
Okay.
But he ends up being forced to make like two vials of it. And Superman drinks one of them to save the professor and Jimmy, right before it explodes. And, it explodes in his stomach and he's burping. He's like, oh. And then he tracks down the bad guys who have the other vial of it. And they're at this like remote cabin. And he bursts in and he sees it on the table and it's about to explode and the bad guys are there. And it's so good. It's so good. Like, he picks it up to drink it and he does a double take and he, you see him recalling what he just went through and he's like, ugh, and he puts it down and he's like, you don't really deserve it, but come on, let's go. And like, he takes them out of the cabin and it blows up. But it was this, and again, like going back to, and again, it's not like he left them there, right? But it was this moment of like, ugh, he's like, I don't feel like drinking this again. And he says to them, he's like, you really don't deserve it, but come with me. It was great. Oh man, I loved it.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try to look for that one. I'll definitely.
So before we take a commercial break and then finally get into the color episodes, anything else from season 2 that you wanted to call out in our lightning round here?
The only thing I'm going to ask you to hit on for a couple of seconds is the final episode of season 2. Is that the one where he discovers a girl who's blind?
Yeah.
Could we let that breathe? Could you talk about that after the commercial break and just talk about your impression of that? I would love to hear that.
Well, I ran through it last time. I don't know that I really have anything else new to add other than to say, like, again, that it really is a standout scene where Clark, in his Clark Kent garb, with his glasses removed, tries to convince this young girl who's blind that Superman is real. It's a beautiful scene, and that was definitely a highlight. Other than that, I think I said everything I needed to say last time. But yeah, that is certainly one of my favorites. All right, so let's take a quick commercial break, and then we will move into the color seasons. All right. We'll be right back. Movie lovers should check out this family of film festivals: the Brightside Tavern Film Festival in Jersey City, the Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival in Asbury Park, and the Point Lookout Film Festival on Long Island. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Also, be sure to listen to the podcasts hosted by the festival's organizer, CJ Cullen. You can find the official Hang On to Your Shorts podcast, as well as the Cullen on Film podcast, via a shared universe network. And we're back. All right. The time has come at last to talk about the color seasons 3 through 6 of Adventures of Superman. Now, as we've explained to our audience, like, you and I have been talking about this television series for months now, just for fun and in anticipation of doing these podcast episodes. And in virtually all of our conversations, you've warned me, right? You've given me a heads up that there's this massive shift. The fact that we go from black and white to color is really the least of it. There's this massive shift in tone and style of the show, and performance as well in a number of respects, with the start of season 3. And I appreciate the heads up because, as you always say, forewarned is forearmed. And honestly, if we boil it down, it really became a kid show. In starting with the 3rd season. For as much as, again, those earlier seasons and that first season in particular, had elements of noir, and they were these crime dramas, and, you occasionally saw people die on screen and Superman's punching people, like, all of that is gone. And so really at the most fundamental level, it really became a show aimed at a very young audience. Is that fair to say?
Totally. Spot on. Yeah. If I could give you my thoughts, and I was going to follow your lead and then add color. But here's my thoughts. Yeah, a substantial change, really a sea change between the end of season 2, which was a transition season, and then 3 to 6 are so similar. But I'll say, as a child, say when I was like 5 or 6 years old, or 7 or 8, it was very, very heartwarming and very enjoyable to watch these color episodes. But they're definitely written for 6-year-old, 8-year-olds, right? That age group, maybe 9-year-olds. But the gangsters are not threatening. They're not belligerent. They're not, they're caricatures. They're kind of mild, just almost cartoon-like gangsters. The threats are not as pronounced as you would see in seasons 1 and 2. It's really written for 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. It was very, very forward-thinking to film in color, because I think even though they filmed it in color, they still broadcast it in black and white for a number of years.
Right.
But to watch them now, they're hard to choke down. And also, one of the sad things is, as we prepared for this, it's really sad to see the change in George Reeves as an actor. I mean, clearly the scripts were not as thoughtful, not as intriguing. But he himself, you could see he between the additional padding in the costume and I think his own aging, he's clearly not the lean, athletic Superman you would see in Superman and the Mole Men or seasons 1 and 2. He's a little punchier. He's a little heavier. He's a little more plotting. And that's just, that decline is kind of sad. And I also think the scripts, to me, it's hard to watch those episodes.
I echo pretty much all of that. And on the subject of Reeves, and we'll talk about his passing, momentarily. But on top of everything you said, he was in his late 30s when he started Adventures of Superman, which is kind of crazy to think about, because you think of, modern day Superman actors, almost every instance, as far as I can remember, they're like mid-20s when they start this, right?
Yeah. Reeves was like 38, I think.
Yeah.
38. So I was so impressed with, like I've said this probably 8 times, I'm sorry, but his athleticism, especially that wrestling thing, when he leaps over the iron railing to the stairs and just jumps down there. It's really sad we could have not seen him in something else around 1954, right? Yeah. Because I do think those last 3 seasons, you got to be a super loyalist to really choke those down.
Yeah, so, here's the thing with the color seasons. And it's funny because there are 4 color seasons, but they only did 13 episodes instead of 26. So the net effect is that you have an equal number of black and white episodes and color episodes. I watched all the black and white episodes, and I watched about a quarter of the color episodes. There were a few that you had recommended. There were a few that I saw written about in articles. There were a few that I picked just based on the description. There were a number that were recommended to me from members of a Facebook group that I'm a part of who are fans of the show. So that was kind of how I selected. I cherry-picked, again, about 13 or 14 episodes across seasons 3 through 6. So full disclosure, I did not watch every single color episode. And before I proceed, let me say this. I'm not... And I would never try to take away from anyone's enjoyment of these episodes, right? And there may very well be people, like yourself. I know, now, you certainly favor the earlier episodes, but, there might be plenty of people, watching us or listening to us, who have very fond memories of watching those color episodes as a kid with their friends or a sibling or a parent, and they mean a lot to them. Or maybe they discovered them later in life, but there's something about them that really speaks to them and they find some charm in it. I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to make a case against them, and for anyone who enjoys them, like, right on, I'm glad you love them. I wish I did, to be honest. I think, and I know I said this to you off mic, but when I started with the color episodes, my gut reaction was they made me sad. They made me sad because of how much I loved the first 2 seasons, and to see the show change that much was disappointing. Again, you had warned me, which was great. But, it's still different when you actually experience it for yourself. And I watched them. I will say that by the time I got to the end of the series, you know, you do sort of get used to the new style and the rhythm of the show in the later seasons. So I found that, you know, I was able to kind of get over that initial, you know, because it's a very jarring shift to go, you know, right off the bat with through the time barrier at the start of season 3. It is very jarring based on what the show had been. And it took me a little while to like really kind of get over that hump. And once I did, you know, I was able to enjoy the episodes well enough. And I think there are some gems in those final seasons, but yeah, it's just so divorced from the show that came before. And you know, it was tough.
Well said. Well said. And if I may, to me, it was substantially different for 2 reasons. Clearly the tone and the strategic approach to writing and the content of the shows. But then also, as you pointed out, you've got Reeves who were all of a sudden, boy, you can tell when they're not using the deep hair dye. There's a number of things where he looks older and more plodding and heavier. And I think it's his own aging, but also more padding in the costume, because he doesn't look that padded when he's wearing his Clark Kent suit. He seemed a little more nimble in that. But yeah, it's disappointing. It is sad because I think both of us have such intense appreciation for seasons 1 and 2, and this is. You know, granted, it was oriented towards young children, but it is a letdown.
You know, I was thinking about this a lot. I think had the first 2 seasons not existed, if we just had seasons 3 through 6 and it was like, hey, it was this like silly kid show in the 50s, I don't know that I would necessarily spend much time with it, but I'd be like, okay, like it is what it is. Like, you know, it's fine. It's the fact that we were coming off of those 2 seasons that I really did love a lot. I think that's what made it hard to really get into those color seasons.
And to say something, I want to say this fast and then get back, because I do want to ask you questions about the 13 episodes or 14 that you watched. But you asked this question to me early in our discussion, and how my perception of George Reeves in seasons 1 and 2 informed me. And candidly, his strength, his purpose, his decisiveness, his charm and authority really turned me off to even the Adam West Batman. I mean, that was kind of silly and over the top. And having grown up with George Reeves being this assertive, decisive, purposeful character, it really made it hard for me to acclimate to Adam West Batman.
Yeah, no, I could understand that for sure. You know, I guess we could maybe give some specific examples so, you know, people have a clear sense of what we're talking about with these color seasons. You know, again, where the earlier episodes were, you know, punchy and a little darker and, you know, had a little more forward momentum. I mean, these color episodes, I don't know, they felt slower and softer. And again, they just didn't really have much,
energy or pacing.
Yeah, and like there really aren't any that I would describe as thrilling, you know, in the way that I might for some of the earlier episodes. I mean, again, this wasn't on any of the lists really that I came across, but I wanted to watch Through the Time Barrier, the season 1 premiere. I wanted to watch the first episode of this new era. And in terms of sort of establishing the new the new version of the show, I think it is effective. You have Professor Twiddle, is the same actor who played Uncle Oscar in 2 of the black and white episodes, invents a time machine. So it's like right off the bat, as much as in season 2, you know, the show leaned into sci-fi, you know, a little bit more in a few instances, you know, right off the bat, we have a time machine and our gang is transported to 50,000 BC. And, you know, they're cracking jokes and laughing about it. Like no one really, I mean, the fact that they're time traveling in the first place, of course, is a big departure. I think the reactions to it didn't really ring true based on, you know, I think the versions of the characters that we had known, you know, they had Lois in this like really skimpy, like cave woman outfit, which, you know, is fine and everything. But again, you know, just going back to the depiction of Lois, it's like, I couldn't imagine the Phyllis Coates Lois Lane, like in that situation, you know, it just felt kind of removed. So, you know, right off the bat, you know, you have an episode like that, you know, it got increasingly silly how nobody put two and two together about Clark and Superman being one and the same. I mean, in that time traveling episode, it's a very small group of people. And it's like he comes through as Clark, right? And then he's like, oh, I'm going to go explore. He changes into Superman and he's like, oh, I followed you. Like I flew through the time barrier. And Lois is like, well, can you go back? Because the professor needs some, needs some information that's on his desk. And he's like, oh, it's a one-way trip. I can't get back. But then, of course, like when they all do, and then there's ultimately like an element on a meteor or something that they need to power the time machine, and Superman gets it, and then Clark returns to make the journey back with them, and they're like, well, where's Superman? And Clark's like, oh, well, once he touched the mineral, then he was able to fly through the time barrier again. It's like, again, you always have to have a suspension of disbelief with the whole dual identity thing. I get that, but I feel like in the later seasons, like it really pushed it.
Well said.
But how would you, because I know I mentioned this, but, sort of the change in performance and, certainly, the physical appearance of Reeve was one thing, but in terms of how he played the character, well, both Clark and Superman, what sort of shift did you notice?
I noticed there were a few episodes in those where he's more patient, more caring, even when he talks to like Jimmy. Like, I remember there was one where I forget the context, but this does speak to the beneficence of the Daily Planet. I think they bought a horse. Some horse was going to be put out to pasture, and Perry decides to use the funds of the Daily Planet to buy the horse from his old friend. But the horse is really sick, and Clark, Jimmy says something, and Clark's very patient. Goes, the horse is laying down, and he goes, no, Jim, horses sleep standing up. But he was very patient as he said it. So both the rendition of Superman and the rendition of Clark, his Clark was not as intense or decisive. I still enjoyed his Clark, but both were much calmer, more, child-oriented. It was almost a very paternal, loving Superman, the Superman version.
That was exactly the word that I've been kicking around, paternal. I think you very much get that sense. And knowing that these episodes were really aimed at kids, it makes sense. Like I do get it. But again, it just kind of takes, it's funny. We've spent now, 3 hours over these, or 3+ hours over all these episodes, talking about how much we like that decisive, strong Clark. And, to kind of lose that dimension, for me as a viewer, as a fan, like it does take something away. And, it's interesting with this paternal aspect, because I agree. And I could see how that could play well for kids, but to me, I don't know, how do I put this? It's like, I think there can be a fine line between being paternal and being condescending. And I not that, I don't even know how to put this. It's not like he was blatantly talking down to characters, but it just felt like he was always like a step ahead of everyone. In a lot of the episodes that I watched, I kind of got that sense, and it just took away to me, it just didn't feel like there was much tension. It's like he kind of always, like I said, always was kind of like a step ahead. Like he always had a plan that we weren't always in on, was always pretty calm, which, again, maybe for kids, like they needed that, but I don't know. It's like, it just didn't seem like much really posed a challenge for him.
And there really wasn't any risk.
Right.
You felt he was so calm and kind of so relaxed, even as a child being 7 or 8 years old or 9 years old. Well, I know how it's going to end. Yeah, he's not stressed about it, He's just going to calmly, we'll let this thing play out, and at the end, we'll just hit reset and everything will be cool. So there wasn't a sense of stress or risk or jeopardy. May I ask this? What were some of the episodes you watched? Did you watch the episode where he goes to Paris?
Yeah, I watched that. But going back to season 3 real quick, I did watch The Bully of Dry Gulch.
Oh my God, yeah.
Which
Myron Healy played the cowboy who threatens Jimmy.
Yeah, and I mean, so I take it you remember this episode well?
Yes, and interestingly, there was a comic book about this. This was from a Jimmy Olsen story that kind of was printed almost simultaneous in time. But yeah, I do remember The Bully of Dry Gulch. Yes.
And actually, I want to thank you real quick, because you sent me a list of the comic stories and episodes of Adventures of Superman that matched up. And actually, last night I read Menace from the Stars, the Panic in the Sky takeoff. So it was cool to see the story play out in a different medium. Not to put down the comic, but I think, you really lose something without having that performance, that we've talked about from Panic in the Sky. It's really not the same effect.
I agree.
It hits a lot of the same beats, right? Like Superman tries to stop the asteroid. He loses his memory. He thinks the power comes from the costume. He figures out what he needs to do. He saves the day. But yeah, it really lost something for sure.
I love that 20 or 30 seconds in that Panic of the Sky where, like we've said this 7 or 8 times, the turmoil and the stress and the frustration and just the anxiety he's going through when he's trying to discern his identity, it translates much more powerfully to the screen and to Reeves from an acting standpoint.
For sure.
But I digress. I'm dying to hear the episodes you chose to see if I remember so I can throw a perspective on it.
Sure. I mean, let me just say about the Bully of Dry Gulch, so yeah, the basic premise, right? Lois and Jimmy are spending the night in this little, Western town. And there's this bully who, seemingly is shooting people on sight if they rub him the wrong way. And they throw Jimmy in jail and he's going to get shot at high noon, and they call Clark. There are a couple of funny moments, which I will give them that. But again, I think this is a perfect example of a show really lacking in any real danger or tension, because especially once Clark arrives, like there's no threat to him. Like he could easily end this like any second, right? But he, as Clark in particular, he like really takes this guy to like they play like he plays poker with the bully, right? And the bully has a trick deck of cards, and Clark uses his heat vision to burn them, and then he uses his superpowers to cheat himself to kind of teach the guy a lesson. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe for kids, was it a helpful episode in terms of how to deal with the bully? I mean, maybe. And I think he literally says to Jimmy at the end, like most bullies, like they'll back down if you could, or something like that. But again, there was no tension. It was like, clearly this is something that can end the second that Clark wants it to end, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But there were the two funny things when he burns up the guy's trick deck of cards. And the guy's like, "Oh, I just got those cards." Clark goes, "Well, that's life." And he moves on. So there was funny. And then when, this actually, again, there are things to enjoy in these episodes. When Lois calls Clark, when Jimmy's in trouble, right? Clark is initially like pretty dismissive of Jimmy being in danger and almost accuses Lois of making a joke. She's like, "Oh, come on, Lois, like, enough with this." And then Lois is like, and he's making like googly eyes at me, the bully. And Clark is like, "What?" He like races out of there. So again, like the thing is, it's like, it was funny, but it felt very removed from what we had seen on the show before. So here, I wrote down the ones that I watched. Let's see. Well, let me just rattle them off, and then we can circle back to them. So I said Through the Time Barrier, Lucky Cat, 7 Souvenirs, Bully of Dry Gulch, The Girl Who Hired Superman, Wedding of Superman, The Deadly Rock, The Phantom Ring, Peril in Paris, Divide and Conquer, Superman's Wife, and then the final 3 episodes of the series, which George Reeves directed, Brainy Burro, Perils of Fate, and All That Glitters. So those were the ones that I watched across the final 4 seasons.
Interesting. I'm glad you watched. I definitely want to jump into Reeves as a director with those last 3. But from the ones you mentioned, I do remember what did you say? Divide and Conquer was one of them?
Yeah, which circles back to what you had brought up before about these new powers that he would occasionally develop in these later episodes.
And that wasn't the only time. And for I'm going to let you do it because I think you'll be more succinct than I would. But if you whatever order you want to discuss this, but when you're ready, I'll let you give the synopsis for Divide and Conquer.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I mean, the long and short of it is there's an international incident and Superman surrenders himself to arrest, and so he's in jail, but he also needs to protect the president of is it Mexico? I can't remember if it was Mexico or another country. But in any event, so he's in jail, and he also needs to protect someone. He needs to be in two places at once. What's a Superman to do? Luckily, there's this professor we've never heard of before, or maybe he was, I don't know if he was in another episode that I didn't watch, but he calls in this professor who like flies in immediately. And they have this conversation in the jail cell where the professor theorizes that, you know, his cells are so dense that if he concentrated hard enough, he could separate them and divide himself into two, which he does, but he'll only have half the strength and abilities. And it seems like he has even less than that. Do you remember, like, once he divides himself in two, like they can barely stand.
Yeah, he's really weak.
Yeah.
But I do remember, and I'm sorry, this is for me, you know, going back 40 or 50 years, but I do remember he's in, like, as you said, either Mexico or some South American country. He needs to honor the law, so he gets put in jail. Mm-hmm. And then he does, you know, he separates his molecules and becomes a perfect copy of himself. And I think he goes back to his hotel room and puts on his Clark costume to fool Lois. But he's tremendously weak. And there's a similar episode. I don't know if you got to see it. I think it was called like The Mysterious Cube or something.
I did not watch that one. So yeah, tell me about that one.
So my memory of that is there is, and I'd have to dig this up, but there's some gangster. And somehow he goes in this cube that's basically 8 foot by 8 foot. And he figures, you know what? I'm going to run out the statute of limitations. Now, how he got food and water and, sanitary hygiene stuff in there, I don't know. This is like really cramped. But the substance that created this mysterious cube that this guy's hiding in, somehow Superman's able to almost become like the Flash and vibrate his molecules to such a degree that he can go through this substance. He can just become intangible and go through it. But like the scientists go, look, there's a lot of risk there. You might get trapped in there. You know, we don't know if this will work. And I don't think he goes all the way through. He convinces the gangster that he is going to do it, or he goes in and resets the clock. And then the guy comes out early and it's still within that 7 years. And Superman's not at risk as much as he leads people to believe he's at risk. Right? He understates it. But once again, they come up with this brand new power and we never see it again. Same thing with the divide and conquer. He's able to split into two and we never see it again.
Yeah, like, again, it's interesting. And I know certainly, while I haven't read, many of the stories, like I know, especially in the Silver Age, like he always had, there are other powers, and even in the Donner movies, the kiss or turning back time, or the shield that he's able to peel off of his costume, all that stuff. I've never been a fan of that. I guess I just always feel like the guy has enough powers as it is. And I reject a lot of the common criticisms about the character, one of them being that he is too powerful. But it's like, if that is a criticism, if there are people who feel like he has too much power to begin with, it's like, why give him even more?
Yeah. Agreed.
And it's like this, like, especially with dividing himself, it's like, boy, that would have come in handy in the Human Bomb episode for sure.
or to your point, to dispel the suspicions that he and Clark and Superman are the same person.
Yep.
Because he clearly did it in this one when he's Clark back at the hotel room.
Yeah. I know I touched on this before, but they really lay that on thick, the sort of that wink to us, the audience, and even, jabbing the other characters, and them jabbing Clark about him being Superman. I mean, like, almost every episode ends with some sort of remark about, like, well, maybe you're really Superman, and he's got some
maybe
sort of clever,
I am, Lois.
Maybe I am, that sort of thing, or like I wouldn't be here without Clark, or something like that, which is is fine. And obviously these were all standalone episodes, and like you yourself said, right, like there were plenty of episodes you missed, right? So any episode that someone was watching might be their first episode or something like that. So
you watched what was it, The Girl Who Hired Superman?
Yes.
That's hard to choke down, buddy.
What? So again, like I said before, like I noticed there were a few, at least from the ones that I watched, there were a few in these later seasons where there was more of an attempt to like trick Superman. And so in this one you have money counterfeiters who basically come up with this plan to have Superman smuggle in plates to create counterfeit money.
Yeah.
Right, to another country. Well, I just watched it a few days ago. Don't give me too much credit. But they use this young woman, this young heiress, who is not in on the plan, but to hire Superman, right? And the money will go to charity.
Paris Hilton, circa 1956 or something like that.
Yes. The thing that bugged me, and again, this goes back to what I'm saying about just like the lack of real tension in the episode, is Superman figures out their plan off screen. Like he leaves with the plate, which he thinks is film from a photo that was all taken, right? So he leaves with that cartridge, which is actually the counterfeit plates. And off screen, he realizes what has happened, right? But he comes back as Clark. And he's like, and he explains to the bad guys, like, oh, Superman, figured out what was going on, and he sent me here to let you know the police are coming, and for me to kind of get you to come along peacefully.
Why not just come back as Superman?
It's like, it drove me nuts, because at this point, Lois and Jimmy and the heiress, they've been put in like this lead-lined bunker, right? And of course, that's where they bring Clark, and of course, Clark can't reveal his secret, and it's just like, what was the point of this?
And then, if I may, Anthony, what sickened me, what really, really, really does not hold up well, is early in the episode, he does some special displays of his superpowers for this girl. And I think it was photographs were taken. Mm-hmm. But like all he does is like they do reverse photography where he jumps up on top of the shelf over the fireplace. That's it. So the poor guy, all he does is jump down, and they show it in reverse photography. And again, you could clearly see he was not the trim boxer from season 1 or the Mole Men episode. There was a lot of padding in that costume then.
Yeah, I love too though. He when he arrives, he like busts through the window, and he's like, "Well, you wanted a thrilling entrance, and I assume you have the money to repair it." But it's like tearing the house apart. Yeah. So again, that one was just kind of frustrating. It just, again, the tension really felt non-existent, or manufactured at best. I don't know. That one was kind of tough. I was surprised you had such a reaction to it though, but I get why.
Yeah.
I get why.
Yeah. Well, but also, I mean, we discussed this. There's a certain degree of suspension of disbelief, right? But even from a logical standpoint, why did he go back there as Clark? I mean, unless they figured, you know what, we're running short. We need another 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll get Clark down in the lead line bunker, and then he has to have all the stress over not revealing his identity. It was really like, it was almost like they were making it up as they went along in that, when it really defied logic. Yeah,
you know what, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if that is what happened. You might hit the nail on the head. They might have been, at page, 15 of the script and like, oh man, we got another 10 pages. I don't know. Can we talk about a pair of episodes that I think thematically kind of go together? The Wedding of Superman and Superman's Wife.
Please.
You're familiar with both?
I want one caveat. I definitely want to chat with you about the Deadly Rock.
Yes.
So I agree with you. And I think those two that you just mentioned, there is serendipity between those two.
So the Wedding of Superman, Lois has a dream where she marries Superman. I mean, that's the setup for the episode. And Superman's Wife, to be honest, the reason I watched this was that our mutual friend, Steve Odo, the former owner of Alternate Realities, the comic shop where we met and hung out, requested that we discuss it.
Yes.
And
it's his favorite episode. He thinks she is gorgeous.
I texted him after I watched it, and I said, I watched Superman's Wife. I said, I take it you like it because of the actress. And I said, is there anything else that stood out to you about it? No response. No response. So I guess it was really that. I mean, so in that episode, there's a criminal mastermind who's in the shadows. No one knows who he is. And so Henderson brings in this young woman, Sergeant O'Hara, and Superman instantly has an idea. We don't know his full plan yet, but he instantly says, will you marry me? And they pretend to be married. Did Superman's plan track for you? Like, it seemed like there were a lot of leaps that he made. Like, right, what it comes down to is that he assumes if they put the word out that Superman is getting married, that this unknown bad guy will kidnap the wife, right, in order to keep Superman at bay. And it ends up proving true. That is exactly what happens. But I don't know. It felt like there was a lot that had to happen there that he was speculating on.
Yeah. My only sense is I remember watching that as a child. I remember thinking, to give Steve credit, she was gorgeous.
Absolutely.
But your listeners will love this because we've spoken about Steve a lot. Over the past 3 weeks, Steve has said, have you spoken to Anthony about Sergeant O'Hara and being Superman's wife? She's gorgeous. And Steve constantly goes, you know, who's going to look at Lois when she's around? But yeah, even as a child, they were like, wow, this is pretty abrupt. Like they're moving really fast. I know he wants to use her as kind of bait or the tethered goat or, the fulcrum to get this mastermind to come out of hiding. But yeah, it was I also think, if I may, so many of the stories in the 50s and the 60s were about Lois's aspirations to marry Superman and, wow, I'd love to marry him. And maybe this tapped into that and just opened things up for Lois to be jealous. I think it syncs up with comic book stories of the time.
And again, like I've said, this will change as we move forward on this podcast, because I do plan to, read as much as I can of these pre-crisis stories that I've only read about. But as of this recording, it's like, I haven't read, those comic stories where she's, pining to be Superman's wife. But I agree that I think this is very much in the spirit of those stories. I guess the two things that stood out to me about that episode, one is, Lois's jealousy, and it felt, and I guess this probably is in keeping with the comics, like it felt cruel on Superman's part to just kind of like keep her twisting in the wind about this.
There were a lot of stories in the 60s where really the editors were really misogynistic, and they really pandered to the inferiority of women and dismissive and put down. It must have really, I hate to say it, there must have been some cats in Mort Weisinger's head, because a lot of these stories had not just to Lois, but also to Jimmy, cruel pranks and stuff like that. Apparently there was, a good reason at the end, but just weird stuff like, well, Jimmy, I'll adopt you, and then I'll just treat you like crap. But I'm really doing that to fool these gangsters or fool these the anti-Superman revenge squad or something like that. But yeah, really, I agree with you. A degree of just meanness.
And that's, I think, I didn't fully articulate this earlier, but when I was talking about like that line between paternal and condescending and this idea that like Superman's always a step ahead, I think like this is a good example. It's like he clearly has a plan, but he's not cluing anyone else in on it. And not like he's lording it over them, but it does kind of border on the cruel, that especially that he sees Lois feels some sort of way about the fact that Superman married someone and the fact that it came as a surprise. Like, again, the fact that he just kind of keeps her twisting in the wind about it, as opposed to like pulling her aside and being like, listen, this is a plan, you know?
Yeah.
It just felt,
was that the episode where they're in a bathysphere at the end?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I do remember that now. And even at the end, when like Lois is finally connecting the dots, and he goes, hey, will you get out of here? Because
I know
I got to let this thing crash down in the bottom of the sea, so I can fly up. He's kind of like, hey, let's move it along, huh?
Yeah. And then, at the end of the episode, of course, everyone knows, what the plan was, and they're back in Perry's office, and both Sergeant O'Hara and Lois are talking about how they love to marry Superman, and like they say it at the same time, and everyone laughs. And again, I think representative of the times, not, certainly not very progressive in its, examination of the male-female dynamic. But, again, the other thing that kind of comes to mind is, and again, I know this was the 50s and I know it was a kid show, and maybe that's my answer. I guess that is my answer. But, it's like, why not ever have Clark or Superman on this show pursue a genuine romance at all?
I wondered about that in our prior discussion. I mean, we've spoken about the attributes of Reeves' portrayal of Clark being decisive, very confident, charming. They never did anything where there might be someone, even some gangster's girlfriend or some other woman who was attracted to him. And I just never understood that. Quite frankly, this was really the first time they ever had someone who was not a single mother with a child with polio or a blind child. They never had any other really society type or journalist or anyone show any attraction or interest in Clark whatsoever.
Yeah, again, like it's just kind of funny, and especially with Sergeant O'Hara, it's like, as has been established, gorgeous woman. She's a police sergeant, so she can take care of herself. It's not a matter of like, she'll be in harm's way, right? In fact, he put her in harm's way for this ruse. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know that there necessarily was a place for that type of story in this show. I guess not, but it would have been interesting even just to have it explored. Like even for Superman to say like, I'm fully devoted to protecting Metropolis. Like I don't have time for romance. I don't know. Like it was just kind of odd. It's like, well, why not? That's why the sort of the sister episode to this, The Wedding of Superman, where Lois has this dream where she's marrying Superman and Clark is going to be the best man, was interesting. Again, I don't think it did much for the feminist movement, but it was interesting because it was, as far as I know, like the only instance in this show where you saw an actual romance between the two of them. And yes, it was a dream, but you got to see them play it. In
a sad fashion, Anthony, I don't ever remember seeing that episode.
Oh, okay.
So I'm counting on you. You're conveying to me the ingredients of it. I don't remember seeing it. I mean, I know it syncs up with many comic book stories of the 50s and 60s, where she might have, a bump on the head, or, she has a dream and imagines an imaginary tale. But on television, I don't remember seeing this. I don't remember. I will say, and I'm going to ask you to expand, this does seem very similar to the final episode of the entire series, where in that 104th episode, Lois and Jimmy get superpowers. So again, the dream sequence, they didn't do it a lot, but it was kind of like, hey, boop, we got a half an hour episode and we can hit the reset button at the end.
Yeah. I mean, the setup for the episode was that, Superman is meeting with Perry White and Inspector Henderson about taking down, a crime syndicate, and Lois comes in because she needs help. Perry's put her in charge of answering the Lonely Hearts column and giving relationship advice while the regular writer is out. And she comes in looking for help. And honestly, and again, this really didn't age well. I mean, they're all pretty dismissive of her. And, she asks Superman for help. And again, even Superman is basically like, listen, this is not my deal sort of thing, right? And so she goes home and she's like reading all of these letters as she falls asleep. And then, we find out at the end that it's all a dream, that Superman proposes marriage. He reveals his identity to her, and she has not much of a reaction. And that's one of the missed opportunities, I think. It's like, if ever you were going to do this on the show, a dream episode is fine. It would have been interesting to really let them have it out over the fact that he kept the secret from her from all those years, but she accepts it pretty quickly. And then of course it all turns out to be a dream, but I mean, you see them very tender with each other, Superman and Lois. And again, it was really interesting to see because it was the only time I think that you got to, over the 104 episodes.
Yeah. I mean, in different actress, I thought there were some interesting in the very, very, very first season. I thought there was great chemistry between George Reeves and Phyllis Coates. There definitely seemed to be some flirtation and just great chemistry where they're each very interested in the other. But to your point, boy, you didn't see a lot of that from a directing standpoint or from hey, we got to crank out 2 episodes in the next 5 days. So stand on your mark and say your lines.
I still we still have so much to cover, but I know you wanted to talk about the Deadly Rock, right? Where Clark's old friend Gary Allen is mysteriously affected by kryptonite, and it weakens him and causes him to pass out, but then also grants him invulnerability. And I know that's one of your favorites of the Color episodes. What do you like about that one?
I liked it because I thought it was so intriguing. Right now, again, it was very uneven. They don't make it clear how this one individual, an old friend of Clark's, is susceptible. They never make it clear what caused him to be affected by kryptonite. But again, I remember watching it and being just so fascinated where he's at an airport and some bad guy comes in with a kryptonite and it causes great pain to this. Gary Allen is the character's name, the friend. And he gets really sick and nauseous and debilitated and weak. And then Clark and Jimmy go to see him, and Clark likewise hides it, that it causes pain to him. But then when the kryptonite goes away, he kind of recovers. I thought they could have done more with that. I really did. And I also, I've seen the actor who portrayed Gary Allen in other TV shows of the time. And I thought that would have been just kind of intriguing if they could have done something else with it. But they never explained why he was susceptible to it. I think they said something about, well, you were in that plane crash in Africa, and okay, how did that cause it?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, though, because I thought of you. I mean, I knew you liked this episode, but there are numerous references to the asteroid that Superman destroyed in Panic in the Sky. So your favorite episode got a callback, and there were very few of those on the show, So I thought that was kind of cool. And yeah, it was an interesting idea. I watched that because I know you recommended it. And that was certainly one of the stronger ones.
What did you think of it?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, I think really for all the reasons that you said. I mean, it was intriguing, even just initially as they were figuring out like why he was passing out in the first place. Like he goes back to the counter and the bag's still there, and like he instantly passes out again, and they finally piece it together. Well, one thing that was interesting was that because I thought about this with the few episodes, like Clark's old friend Gary Allen, right, who we've never met or heard of before, and there are other episodes too. Is it the Double Trouble episode from the Black and White years where it's like Superman has, or is it Superman or Clark? I think it was Clark, has like this U.S. colonel friend who's stationed in Germany.
Oh, yes. He goes over to Germany or something like that.
Yeah. So he has all of these, it's like, I guess a lot happens off screen sort of thing. And because even when you go back to the origin episode, it's like it seems like he goes straight from Smallville to Metropolis. So it's like clearly he's building this network, off screen.
Well, the thing I always loved about those, like you said, the double episode where some guy's got a twin brother and he goes back to Germany and he uses military intelligence, or even the stolen costume, the wrestling one, Clark's network and his connection of people outside, they all respect him. They're not dismissive. They don't denigrate him. They're very, they treat him as an equal. And I really liked that. I always liked that. I will say I disliked the ending of the Deadly Rock. I thought that was so contrived and really even that did not suspend disbelief enough. When he gets like the weed killer and uses it to burn the kryptonite. Right. I thought that was like, geez, really? But it was their formula. Like, okay, tick tock. Lois and Jimmy are tied up. We gotta wrap this up in another 2 minutes.
Yeah, but your point is a good one. It's like it is an interesting idea that like there's a human who is affected by kryptonite, and the way he's affected is interesting. But just the fact that he's affected by kryptonite is something different. And again, I guess it's easy for us to look back and be like, oh, I wish they would have done more with this. I don't know that they had the motivation or that's just not what the show was, but but you look at this, you look at a lot of these and it's like, oh man, like there are missed opportunities, like to tell like really interesting stories.
Absolutely. You said that better than I could have. I will say they did paint themselves into a corner. And again, I like the actor who portrayed Gary Allen. I've seen him in other stuff, and I like him. But they, really like, well, geez, you're unconscious and invulnerable. That's really not going to set up too many plot lines.
I know it's. I know it's true. It's like, all right.
It would have been interesting, though, if they could have used him more as an investigator or something, where he gets into some trouble, and you don't need the invulnerability ploy, but Superman has to come and rescue him. I think that would have been intriguing. If they played more on his non impact of the kryptonite. But the interesting factoid, that actor played Batman in the 1940s Republic serial of Batman and Robin. So I find it interesting that they tapped into that actor.
Oh, that's cool. That's like, when I rewatched Hollywoodland in advance of today, Ben Affleck played George Reeves. Diane Lane played Tony Maddox. Yeah. So it's like you have this romance between Bruce Wayne and Martha Kent. It was kind of so weird to watch.
And creepy for me to watch that in Hollywoodland. It really creeped me out when Affleck and Diane Lane are in bed together, and I flashed back to Affleck saving Superman's mother. It really creeped me out.
So actually, that's a good segue because I wanted to talk about sadly Reeves passing, the final episodes of the show that he directed, and then the aborted attempts to keep the show going. Before we dive into like our final piece here, I know you'd wanted to say something about the radio show. What did you want to share with us about that?
Oh, the only thing I wanted to offer in terms of the radio show, and I've learned from my past experience. So if you ever want to tee this up for an abbreviated thing, the 2 points, and I can expand on this only at your discretion, but that radio show ran for over 11 years. It had almost 2,100 episodes. But I'll say both the TV show and the comics benefited from the radio show because the radio show was the thing that created and introduced the Daily Planet, Jimmy, Perry White, Inspector Henderson. It introduced Kryptonite. And it also offered the first real substantive team up between Superman and Batman in 1945. So that radio show, I think, really opened the door for the other mediums to tap into it.
No, well said. I mean, and I certainly know of the radio show and what it added to the mythology. I'd be lying if I said I've listened to them. I might have heard some snippets here and there. I certainly have. But I've never really delved into it. But that, I don't know, that might be fodder for an upcoming episode or something like that. I know the two things that you had shared with me that I found fascinating. One was the origin episode where Superman emerges fully grown as an adult from the rocket, which to me is like, it seems like such a bizarre choice. And I know I've said this on the show before, but it's like, that's the part of his journey that I feel often in a lot of these tellings gets shortchanged, like the decision to become Superman. I mean, here it's just like, it's not there at all. So that was interesting. And then, we know, Kryptonite made its debut on the radio show. And the reason for it, I found fascinating.
The actor,
I didn't know this part of it.
Yeah. The actor, this fella, Bud Collyer, did the voice of Superman for over 10 years. And he was also the voice of Superman on the Fleischer cartoons. And he was the voice of Superman in the mid-1960s, those cartoons, Filmation cartoons. But he needed a vacation. I think he did it for years and years and years. And they did this 3 times a week, every other day for 15 minutes or half an hour. So again, there were 2,100 episodes. But he needed a vacation. So the writers came up with the idea, let's get this mineral from his planet that, is poisonous to him. So for 2 weeks, while the true actor's on vacation, they just had some other guy just, groaning and moaning, off in the distance as though he were being radiation poisoned by kryptonite.
That's so funny. And then, again, as far as the other precursors to Adventures of Superman, I know I mentioned and briefly spoke about the Kirk Allen movie serials last time. There was one thing that I know I had shared with you off mic, and I'll mention it here because I do think it's funny. And I might be exaggerating a little bit, but I feel like I'm capturing the spirit of the scene. In the first installment, they go through the origin and they hit the same beats, right? We go from, Krypton to Smallville. And then we see a young adult Clark in the Kent family living room. He's in his suit and he's reading a book. And there's just this funny moment between Jonathan, or I don't know, no, they're not even Jonathan and Martha yet, but Ma and Pa Kent. And they kind of look at each other like, all right, you better say something to him. And I think it's Pa who's like, son, you have these gifts, you really should use them. But it just, I don't know, it really made me laugh. It's this idea of like, he's just sitting there reading and they're like, we've got to tell this kid he's got to do something. So that was kind of funny.
But didn't you say that, okay, I want to finish my book right now?
I mean, basically, because even then, I don't know that he fully takes it to heart, because he doesn't take the next step in his journey until his parents pass. And it's like, however long that takes, it was just kind of interesting, I thought.
If I may say this for the benefit of your audience.
Yeah.
So I did listen to the first 2 episodes. I got them on YouTube or somewhere. I got them. And the very first episode tracks perfectly with the TV show Superman on Earth. I mean, the Council of Wisdom and Krypton and Zorin and the leader of the council, and the whole thing for, hey, we need to build rocket ships to take us off this planet. It tracks perfectly. But then episode 2 starts out with, long story short, this grandfather and grandson are getting on a trolley to go to the state fair, and the conductor, they're the only 2 on. The conductor goes, look, I got to go get a drink of water. It's really hot today. So the trolley, the brakes fall apart, and it starts careening down this huge hill. But Superman is like a mile up in the sky watching the whole thing. He rescues them. And basically, he introduces himself as, I'm Superman, right? So he got out of that rocket full-blown, apparently in costume, and he swears the grandfather and grandson to secrecy. But he goes, I need to learn about your planet. And the grandson, who's like 9 years old, goes, you know what? You ought to work for a newspaper, and you ought to call yourself Clark Kent. And that's it. Done. Done.
Wow.
But I will say, Anthony, to your point, they retrofitted it like 5 years later, where they overrode that origin and they made it sync up more with the origin we're familiar with.
All right.
But that was years down the road. The other thing that's interesting is, apparently in the radio series, Eben died in a fire. So for a while, Clark was just living with Ma Kent, Sarah. But yeah, they speak about how Eben died in a fire early in the interaction.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think, the Superman mythology does owe a great debt to the radio show for a lot of what it introduced. I'm thankful that certain aspects did not carry over, but, clearly it introduced a lot. And that's something that, it's kind of on my list to sort of delve into at some point. So again, we'll circle back to the final few episodes of the show that Reeves directed, but I think, now might be an appropriate time to sort of, examine the end of the show and the aftermath. And sadly, the passing of George Reeves, his death in 1959, right, shortly after the conclusion of the 6th season of Adventures of Superman, died in what was ruled a suicide. But, there's long been a lot of controversy and mystery surrounding his death. And this was the subject of the motion picture Hollywoodland, which came out in 2006. I saw that. It's interesting because, as I talked about last time, right, like I did not watch Adventures of Superman growing up. I knew of it, but that was it, right? I didn't really have much context. And so kind of a lot of what I knew about George Reeves and the show came from watching Hollywoodland. So I did see Hollywoodland in theaters when it came out. I think I watched it one more time on DVD, and then I watched it yet again a few nights ago in anticipation of our discussion. And I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, for anyone who's curious at all about George Reeves and specifically about the circumstances surrounding his death, I do recommend that they watch it.
Oh, and you very graciously gave it to me as a gift.
Well, we kept talking about it and you hadn't seen it. And I was like, well, this guy's got to see it. And I figured, I figured you would appreciate it. So I'm glad glad you enjoyed it.
I did. One thing I'll say, and this is very personal, you've galvanized and energized me. And you've increased my appreciation, especially for George Reeves and his portrayal of Superman. And it's just heightened my interest. But to go from the first 2 seasons to the last 4 seasons to Hollywoodland, it's you feel very sad at the end. And my heart goes out to George Reeves. My heart goes out to him because he seemed to love acting, but he really didn't. It was very tragic the way the whole thing evolved and unfolded. And like you said, there is controversy. I can remember reading the different thoughts. Like, it was an open secret in Hollywood that his girlfriend was Toni Mannix, who was the wife of some mob boss. But it was an open secret. Everyone knew. They would go to parties together and pictures were taken, and she took care of the boy.
Yeah, he was a kept man, especially as depicted in the movie, where she buys him a house and all these gifts and everything. And her husband was Eddie Mannix, the general manager of MGM Studios. And there was this really funny scene, and I'm not positive if this was true to life or not, but they're all at dinner together. It's Eddie and Tony and George Reeves and Eddie's mistress. So like you said, it was very much this open secret that he was having an affair with this woman.
Right. But then the other elements that I remember reading is that he broke up with Toni Mannix, and the woman that he became infatuated with, there was a lot of stories that he fell head over heels in love with her, this younger woman. He just really infatuated with her. But there were stories that she was a con artist, and she was not really, even separate from the movie, she was not really a stand-up person. She was really a con artist. And then also the theory that he got so depressed that he may have killed himself, committed suicide. But there were a lot of bizarre things, like they cleaned up the room in which the shots were fired, in which he was found, very quickly. There was no proper police investigation. And this whole thing just was never reconciled, never understood. So you had these 3 diverse theories floating around. Did Eddie Mannix off because his wife was grieving and hurt because she was spurned? Was it an accident with the woman he was engaged to, his fiancée? Or did he do it just via depression? I can really appreciate the scene in there when the young boy, Adrian Brody's son, is just so grieving and so hurt. But when I look at this from seasons 1 and 2, the bit of the decline to seasons 3 through 6, and then to this movie, boy, it just breaks your heart at the end. It's very tragic.
100%. And that's the thing. It's like, regardless of how he died, unfortunately, we'll likely never know for sure what happened. But either way, no matter which scenario, is true, it's a sad and tragic ending, for this guy. And it's sad to see. The movie is really interesting. It really presents those 3 scenarios, right? And so the main timeline in the movie, the main storyline, is Adrian Brody's character, a private eye who's investigating Reeves' death at the behest of his mother. But we also have flashbacks to key moments in Reeves' life, again, as depicted by Ben Affleck. And this is really not spoiling anything, but the movie really does present and show you the 3 possible scenarios as to how Reeves might have died. And do you feel like the movie came down on one more so than the other?
No, I thought the movie did a great job of making each of the 3 plausible.
I agree for the most part, although I initially was fully committed to that opinion, but after rewatching it, well, again, I don't want to give too much away, but in terms of the scenario that they end on in the movie, I feel like Adrian Brody's character comes to somewhat of a conclusion. Whether the movie is making that same conclusion, I think, is something else. But in any event, people can watch it if they haven't. It's 15 years old at this point, but I feel like it kind of flew somewhat under the radar. It was generally well received, but wasn't like a huge smash or anything like that. So I'm sure there are plenty of people who haven't watched it, and I would encourage them to. But you hit on something, and this was actually a question that I wanted to ask you, because I agree. I think a real standout moment in the movie is when Adrian Brody's character is really struggling over the fact that the guy who plays his favorite character on television seemingly killed himself. And, this was also at a time, suicide and mental health. I mean, I don't think there was a lot of, understanding about, those mental health issues as there is now. And so I'm sure that was a very tough thing for kids in particular to process. I mean, so I know by the time you were watching Adventures of Superman, it was in reruns and Reeves had already died and all of that. Do you remember though, like when you first found out what happened to the guy who played Superman?
Yes. Once again, and to the benefit of your listeners, I vividly remember watching this show predominantly during summers. And maybe it just conflicted when I was getting home from school, but I remember watching it in summers. And I remember, once again, like I told the other story, when one of my friends gave me a synopsis of the origin of Superman on Earth. But I remember one of the I guess I was at a Little League game, or we were playing a pickup game, and one of the young boys that I went to school with said, "Oh yeah, he committed suicide. He jumped off a skyscraper. He thought he could fly." So I do remember people telling me that he committed suicide, but I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And I can also wondering like, well, why don't they do more episodes of Superman? And then this kid told me this. I guess in some ways, I do view it as a tragedy, but maybe it's better that he died when he did, because there were so many things at the end where, when I watched Hollywoodland, you felt bad, like he was going to do wrestling matches and stuff like that, and they seemed such a step down. But it's also sad that he couldn't. I know he tried to do his own production thing of something called Port of Entry, couldn't get funding for that, or you don't know if Tony Mannix, his husband, put the kibosh on that. It would have been interesting if he could have done another character, maybe after season 2. It would have been interesting to see where he would have gone, because he loved acting, right? And I always wondered, why didn't he guest star in another show, a detective show where he could play a bad guy? Maybe, I wonder what his contract was like. Maybe it prohibited other portrayals. But why didn't he try to do like summer stock or theater or something like that? I would have loved to have seen the contract between the producers of the show and George Reeves, because I know they had a 30-day clause where he could be called back on 30 days notice. And clearly that would have precluded doing feature films or something like that. But it's tragic to me. It's really tragic, because he's so indelible in my mind. And listen, I've loved him as an actor. It's just sad to see how it declined and the way it ended.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. And again, whether for you, finding out, even though it was a few years later, and especially for the kids, who like lived through it as it was happening and as they were watching the show. I mean, I'm sure that must have been a very difficult thing to reconcile. And, this is, a question that comes up all the time, right? As far as whether and to what extent you can or you should separate the art from the artist and all of that. And, again, like I keep saying, I just think that must have been a tough thing to reconcile. I'm glad that the legacy of his performance and the legacy of the show has endured and overcome the circumstances of his passing, right? Because you're still watching the show in reruns, right? Like, as we talked about, like, you have season 1 on DVD, but that's it. And you famously don't have any streaming services or anything like that, but you still catch it on your rabbit ears. Yes.
Every weekend on Heroes and Icons, which I get through the rabbit ears, they show like 6 episodes. Now, they do it 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., so I've really got to be interested to get up then. But then they show on Sundays another 2 episodes around midday. And the fact that it's still broadcast, it's a credit, even with the limitations and almost the punitive impact of cheap budgets and cheap production, pump it out. It's a credit to him. And like we've said, those first 2 seasons, there's some gems in there that hold up well.
Yeah. And so, so I'm glad that, again, the legacy of the show has endured. And
are you going to use this as a trigger point to talk about the aborted possibilities of what they were going to do
Yeah, I mean, this has
to
been
keep the money machine going?
Yeah, this has been reported. I mean, there was an idea to spin off Jimmy Olsen, and it would be Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and Superman would appear via stock footage and body doubles and things like that. And apparently, Jack Larson, who played Jimmy, rejected that. Upon being presented with the idea, I'm certainly glad. I think it would have tarnished the legacy of the show, and I do think it would have been disrespectful to the memory of Reeves to do that. And also, just as a complete side note, we talked about how much the show changed. You look at the Jim Olsen of season 1 versus the Jimmy of the color seasons. And I mean, as much as, he was always the source of some comic relief, and more so in season 2, I mean, by the color seasons, he's a buffoon. So it's like, I don't know how much I would have wanted to see that anyway.
And Anthony, to your point, if you take the Jimmy from season 1, the Mad Bomber, and if that's kind of the high point of his,
I know, it's all downhill from that was his best moment.
When that's your high point, that's your ideal, and then you say he's a buffoon in the others, that really is going to say something to your audience about, wow. And like I've said, he must be a writer's dream.
Yeah, no, for sure. There was. I do want to talk for a minute about the Superboy pilot, but do you want to just quickly explain Super Pups?
Yeah, I mean, if I can say this, right? I only saw these things through Google and Wikipedia, but Anthony, to your point, I heard there were 3 theories to try to keep the show going. One is exactly what you said. We'll get Jack Larson, throw him out there, and we'll use stock footage, and we'll use some body doubles, but we'll center it on Jimmy, and Superman will save him, and we'll splice in stuff. And I think it's a credit to Jack Larson's ethics. Like you said, it would have tarnished. It would have just been so, I think, disgusting and money grubbing. So I'm glad he shut that down. But the other 2 things, I'll let you. I'll kick the. I did hear that someone. Oh, Jesus, must have been on acid and had the idea that we'll keep the show going. We'll keep all the actors in costume, but we'll make them puppies. Bark Bent was going to be, the dog that played Clark Kent and also played Superman. So they'd have a Superman costume and this giant, almost like something you'd see at Disneyland. They'd all be puppies. And it must have been like, geez, we're going to go even lower in the age scale. Instead of 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, we're going to 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and try to keep it. It must have been, like, I hate to say it. Hey, we built the sets. God knows they got mileage out of Perry's office. I never understood where his windows were, but they got mileage out of that. And maybe they felt, look, well, and these are my words, it's a money machine. Let's keep the money machine going. I'm glad they terminated that. Now, to your point, I'm going to let you speak about it, but there was, I think, in 1961, the potential of launching Superboy, which was very akin to what they did, I think, in the late 80s or 90s with another Superboy series. I think they filmed a pilot, and I think they had 15 scripts ready to go, but it wasn't picked up.
Yeah, exactly. And so I watched The Adventures of Superboy pilot on YouTube, which is the only place that I could find it. And I mean, it was extremely low quality, but it was watchable enough, video quality. I mean, as far as the show itself, it was interesting. It wasn't bad, but it felt like it could have just as easily been an episode of Adventures of Superman, which I guess is what they were going for. I mean, other than the fact that he was younger and he was talking to Lana instead of Lois, it very much could have been the same show.
I couldn't agree more. I watched maybe 2 or 3 minutes of that Superboy pilot where he's in some room, but he didn't strike me as a teenager. I mean, I think they could have just as easily made him the new Superman and maybe recast the actress and the other characters, because he didn't strike me as, someone who's 19 years old or something like that. He came across as older.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he captured the George Reeves essence relatively well, but I agree. Like, he didn't necessarily play as like a teenager, more like a young adult Clark. Even more so probably because George Reeves was so much older when he started, you know? So I feel like, so your idea of like just kind of rebooting Adventures of Superman might have made more sense. But it very much, it had the same style and rhythm. The costume was very similar. They used the same wind effect when he's flying. The music was similar, but it was its own theme. Can I just say, and I know we mentioned this last time about, you know, the opening to Adventures of Superman, that, you know, minute-long intro that plays, you know, faster than a speeding bullet, all of that.
And who? Disguised.
Exactly. I mean, we can recite it, right? I think any fan can recite it. It did such a great job, right, of pulling you in and setting the stage for what you were about to see, and was so iconic. And similarly, as limited as they were with the effects and the flying in particular, they got, you know, the wind effect and the music did a lot. It really did a lot to conjure the magic of like, this guy is flying.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I just,
time, yeah.
And I just wanted to mention too, because, you know, going back to, you know, you watching it as a kid, I mentioned to my dad recently that I've been watching the episodes and that I was going to podcast about it. And immediately he was like, oh, I watch those all the time. He's like, I remember like racing home from school to watch them. And I know my mom watched them too. And my grandparents, it's funny because it's like, especially for my grandparents, I think that's like, if you were to ask them like, oh, like, who do you think of as Superman? It's like, that's their primary exposure to the character. So really across generations, I mean, I think it really,
it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it really was the introduction for so many people, and just within my own family. And it's funny, I can't help but wonder, like, both of my parents watching it as a kid, you know, they were ultimately the ones who bought me my first comic and read it to me and all of that. And it's like, I don't know, maybe it helped that they had this knowledge of who Superman was, you know?
No.
You know, I'm only speculating, but there might be something to that.
No, their receptivity, or, hey, I enjoyed it. And listen, you know, you've heard me speak about this for 25 years. My nephews, I've now instilled in them a love of DC and Marvel by virtue of things I would buy them over the years incrementally, like the Justice League Unlimited or some of those TV shows. It's let me bond with them. And I know that they have really come to enjoy their appreciation of just, you know, reading and exposure and different mythologies and thoughts and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's great. You know, actually, that was one of the things I was going to ask you because, you know, you and I both, but, you know, you spent a lot of time hanging out at a comic shop. You go to comic conventions. You've met a lot of fellow comics fans in your time. Do you find that a lot of people share your affinity for Adventures of Superman, or is it not the case? Does it not come up? Like, I'm curious.
It really, it has not come up at all. Not at all. I can't think of any instance where I've been at a convention over the past 20 or 25 years where there's even been a question about it. And quite frankly, the reason I bought season 1, you know, maybe 15 or 16 years ago was you guys in the store, I think, were watching it. And I remember discussing it with Steve and Roby, and that triggered, you know, maybe I ought to get that just to watch that again. But even when I bought the season 1, I remember going, geez, I hope this is better than, you know, the color versions. And I was very, very pleased that it was. But no, I've never encountered, you know, someone my age where we've taken a pause and go, hey, let's talk about the Adventures of Superman. You and the guys at the store are the only the environment under which I've discussed it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you know, aside from the personal enjoyment of having these chats with you and the personal fulfillment for me of kind of closing this gap in my Superman fandom, you know, one of the other reasons why I'm happy to do these podcast episodes is that, you know, if there are other fans out there who, you know, don't have someone to talk to about Adventures of Superman, they can kind of experience a bit of that through our discussion. And, you know, maybe this will turn some people on to the show if they've never watched it, or maybe like me, they watched a couple and they were like, you know, that didn't really grab me. You know, maybe this will inspire some people. Cause I really think that it really deserves its place in the Superman canon. And, there certainly are plenty of fans out there. I mean, I mentioned that Facebook group that I'm in, and it has thousands of members, and there are people who are posting images from the episodes all the time. So, the fans are certainly out there. But, I mean, you're right, whether it's at conventions or, again, just, talk at the comic shop or whatever it might be, it's not in the nerd zeitgeist, like, now the way that, whether it's even something like Smallville, right, which has been off the air for 10 years, but that cast is going to conventions and they're active on social media and they're making guest appearances on the Arrowverse show. Like, it's still, kind of in the mix. Whereas this is, decades gone at this point. Most of the cast has passed and everything.
And to your point, two things I'll say. It's interesting that really Noel Neal and Jack Larson never did anything after. It's not like they went on to another TV series, either of them, in a different character or a different role whatsoever. So once it was over, really their careers. Now I do know each of them has appeared at conventions. But then the other thing I find interesting is this thing went dormant for 20 years, right? 1958 was the last TV show, and it was 1977 or 78 before Donner came out. And, I really, really do salute Christopher Reeve for, I don't want you to think I'm denigrating anyone else just to put George Reeves up on a pedestal, because Christopher doing it did such a superb job. I just didn't care for that portrayal of Clark.
No, I understand. And I think this will be a theme on this podcast. Each actor, when we're talking about the adaptations and, each writer and artist in the comics, they all bring something a little different. And again, I think Superman, as I keep saying, is a rich enough character that there's enough to mine there. So just closing the loop on the Superboy discussion. Yeah, that show did not move forward. I'm not heartbroken. Again, I'm going to talk about this in a future episode. I kind of have a philosophical objection to Superboy generally, with some exceptions. But the notion of Clark adopting a costumed identity in Smallville, I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect. It doesn't really track for me. So between that and the fact that the Superboy pilot was really just kind of like a carbon copy of Adventures of Superman, I'm not heartbroken that it didn't move forward, but it's certainly an interesting artifact. And for anyone who's curious, if you type in Adventures of Superboy 1961 pilot on YouTube, you'll likely find it. So kind of, bringing us to the finish line here, the final 3 episodes, the Brainy Burrow, the Perils of Superman, and All That Glitters, the last 3 episodes of season 6 of the entire series were all directed by George Reeves. You encouraged me to watch those. I'll be honest, the mind-reading donkey one and Jimmy Olsen's dream where he and Lois have powers, those were kind of tough. The middle episode, though, was a lot of fun. Was your assessment of the 3 kind of similar?
I could not have said it better. And we are absolutely simpatico. Of the 3, that middle one, I just think it's fantastic. I really think, for the benefit of your listeners, that was really a throwback to the cliffhanger serials of really the 19-teens and 20s and 30s, the Perils of Pauline. And they hit all the tropes. They had Perry in a lumber mill facing a buzzsaw. They had Clark over a vat of acid. They had Jimmy hanging from a cliff and Lois tied to railroad tracks. But I really think George Reeves had fun directing that. I think there seemed to be some nice humor as they paid that homage to the old serial cliffhanger movies.
Yeah, for sure. That one was a lot of fun. Again, the mind-reading donkey one, that was tough for sure. And then the finale where Jimmy has this hallucination that he and Lois have the powers of Superman. Again, it was kind of interesting, like to see Lois and Jimmy flying. It was something a little bit different. But again, not necessarily the strongest outing. But the middle episode, for all the reasons you described, stood out. I'll be honest, and this is my own fault. I don't know what I expected, but going into those episodes, knowing that George Reeves directed them, I don't know. I guess I was. And there's really no basis for this, but in the back of my mind, I was like, maybe there'll be somewhat of a return to those earlier episodes that I liked. And again, obviously that was not the case. And it was, there was no real reason for me to anticipate that.
Well, but Anthony, once again, we're simpatico. I wish he had lived, and I wish he would have found more enjoyment, maybe moving from being in front of the camera to working behind the camera. He might have enjoyed that from a creative standpoint. And I did hear rumors that when they tried to bring them back for that seventh season, that there was talk that they were going to put more money into the production and, get better scripts and better stories and better, scenery and stuff like that. So I wish he could have had more of an opportunity to work as a director, because I think he would have derived just creative enjoyment from that.
No, for sure. And I know you had mentioned this off mic before we started, and I had come across this in my research too, that there was a script for a movie, right? That would have, used the cast and been based on the show, but it was deemed too expensive and they couldn't get funding for it.
Correct. That's what I heard. Yeah. Superman, I think it was in 1957, and it was plans for a feature film. It was supposed to be Superman and the Secret Planet. But I know a couple of other 1950s children's shows, like The Lone Ranger. They did a couple of feature films in the late 50s, and apparently they were great box office successes. So it's a shame they couldn't have done that. Who knows?
Yeah,
the road that might have been.
No, for sure. As we wrap up here, I got to say it's been, like I said, very personally fulfilling for me to close this gap. I mean, I'm a lifelong Superman fan from ages 5 to I'm currently 33. Yet, there was this huge piece of the Superman puzzle that I hadn't explored, and now I have, and I've been able to do that in large part because of you and your enthusiasm and your knowledge and your perspective, your history with the show. It's really, again, I know you've thanked me for motivating you to revisit it, but I really thank you so much for everything that you've brought to our discussions.
Well, that cuts both ways. Really, I never, again, I said this many times. Your interest and your reaching out to me really lit the fire where I watched a lot more episodes. I did a lot more research on Wikipedia and Google and blog spots and websites where I cultivated this kind of minutia knowledge, but it's been fascinating. And again, I guess the other thought is it increased my interest in and my appreciation of the character. But the sad thing is, boy, I do feel it was such a tragedy. That poor guy just couldn't find the happiness he was seeking. Yeah. And,
between the shift in the style of the show with the color seasons, and of course the circumstances surrounding Reeves' passing, there are certainly, a number of disappointing and sad aspects to this whole piece of the show. But I will say, those first 2 seasons, I hope and anticipate that they'll become a part of my regular Superman, rotation. Whether it's the Christopher Reeve movies or the more recent Snyder movies or Smallville, there's so much stuff that I go back to from time to time. And again, my intention certainly is especially for those black and white episodes to kind of become part of that rotation. And as I have certain annual traditions. I watch It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas Eve. I watch a selection of Honeymooners episodes every New Year's Day. And I don't know, maybe I'll watch some Adventures of Superman episodes like every Thanksgiving or something like that. It's the sort of thing that really has come to hold a special place for me. And I hope to continue that moving forward.
Amen. I could not have said it better. I'll likewise. Periodically, I'll dust off certain of these things just to reawaken my enjoyment of the character and the stories and the time. So, yeah, I could see this becoming, to steal your words, kind of an annual tradition where I watch 3 or 4 and just, reminisce.
All right. Well, listen, we've been going for 2.5 hours. So for any of our audience who's been with us, thank you. Or maybe you skipped around, whatever the case may be. But, we really appreciate you, coming on this ride with us. It's been a lot of fun. Perhaps we'll do a revisited episode down the line where, if we come up with more stuff to talk about, we will. But I think for the both of us, we've been having so many conversations about it. And I feel like, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like we brought all of that to these podcasts. I really feel like we captured, all those conversations that we've been having. I really feel like we were able to bring that to the show.
I totally agree. And I'm sorry to be a jerk, this is the purist in me. I really wish, and I've said this like 10 times, that first weekend when we both watched Superman on Earth within like the same 24 hours, oh my God, that was lightning in a bottle, because that was the first time I'd ever seen it. And I can just remember being so jazzed with you. But boy, I'll tell you, every discussion that you've recorded, I think our energy level has matched that. I really do.
I do too. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who has listened or watched. I really appreciate it. We will be back with an all new episode in 2 weeks. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Art by Greg Schiegel, music by Basic Printer. If you like what you heard, be sure to listen to My Comic Shop History, available on most major podcast platforms. Sign up for exclusive additional content, including the Digging for Kryptonite companion podcast, at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato, and watch my documentary film, My Comic Shop Country, out now on Apple TV and Amazon.